So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here for the 2022 John Breaux Symposium, Civic Engagement for the Common Good. My name is Kelsey Sibley. I am the program coordinator for the Reilly Center for Media and Public Affairs here at the LSU Manship School of Mass Communication. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. First, restrooms are down this hallway to my left if you need them, but there are volunteers who can point you in the right direction if you get lost. And then secondly, any question and answer portions of the day, volunteers will be walking around with a handheld mic. They will be holding onto those mics for COVID safety as well as time constraints. So please wait for the mic to get to you to ask any questions that you have so that it is picked up on our live stream. And we encourage tweeting, Instagramming, Snapchatting, TikToking, and any and all audience participation using the hashtag Bro22. It will be on all of the slides that will show up for each portion of today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Josh Grimm, Interim Dean of the Manship School.
Thank you, Kelsey. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here for the 2022 John Breaux Symposium, Civic Engagement for the Common Good. I'm Interim Dean of the Manship School of Mass Communication, Josh Grimm, and I'm happy to be here with all of you for the Reilly Center for the Media and Public Affairs first in-person event in 2 years, which is pretty sensational. I'm glad to see you all in person. This year's symposium comes as the world has grappled with a pandemic, a racial reckoning, and unprecedented civic engagement efforts in the last 2 years. Today, we plan to cover the intersection of philanthropy, volunteerism, and public service. In addition to a panel featuring leaders in civic engagement and philanthropy, there will be presentations by the 2021-2022 Public Policy Fellow, Dr. Katie Knobloch, and grantee recipients from the Community Capacity Building Program, the Community Collaborative, by the community, for the community. We'll wrap up with a keynote address this evening delivered by Mr. Roger Ogden. As many of you know, the work of the Reilly Center is to address contemporary media and public affairs issues, advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, and enable civic engagement and leadership. Under the direction of Dr. Janae Slocum, the center has expanded its reach across the state of Louisiana and built coalitions dedicated to advancing similar initiatives. The center's staff, made up mostly of graduate and undergraduate students, works tirelessly to develop, implement, and disseminate programming, research, and civic engagement opportunities. Today's symposium concept began in 2020 in honor of the late Dee Dee Reilly, matriarch of the Reilly family and wife of the Reilly Center's namesake, Kevin P. Reilly Sr. We're grateful to have President and CEO of Lamar Advertising and Dee Dee's son, Sean Reilly, to welcome you all and give us an insight into her philosophy, which was the guiding light for this year's symposium.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming to this year's Breaux Symposium and its focus on civic engagement. And thank you, Janae and team. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming to this year's Breaux Symposium and its focus on civic engagement. And thank you, Janae and team, for honoring my mother, Dee Dee Reilly, particularly around this theme, because it truly meant so much to her. You know, when I think about the phrase civic engagement, I kind of view it as the intersection between politics, philanthropy, activism, and voluntarism. And when I think about my mom and dad, you know, my dad was a more public figure. He was more on the side of politics. My mom, on the other hand, was more tilted towards the philanthropy and voluntarism side of what it means to be civically engaged. And you know, as I mentioned, my dad was a little more public. He was an elected official. Mom was a little more private or quiet, as it were, about the way she went about her civic engagement. But I would say this: that doesn't mean it wasn't as impactful, quite frankly. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples, because when my mom jumped in, she was all in. The first example was the founding of the Speech and Hearing Foundation. The first executive director was a woman named Marty Neely, and Mom really believed in Marty Neely. And when Marty pitched where the Speech and Hearing Foundation could go, Mom jumped in, and she jumped all in. She was a founding member and largest philanthropist. And today, you know the Speech and Hearing Foundation as the Emerge Center, and what a great story that has been. And you know, that's just an example of my mom, Dee Dee, dropping a pebble in a pond and having the ripples have such a great effect. Another example would be her work with Planned Parenthood. Mom was a big believer and big supporter of Holly Haymaker, who was one of the Sentinel founders of Planned Parenthood in Baton Rouge. And Mom really believed in Holly. So she didn't just believe in the cause, but she also believed in the cause maker, the impetus, the people impetus behind the cause. Because she liked to back people who she believed were also all in. And today, Planned Parenthood has a new home for women's health services here in Baton Rouge, which in all likelihood would not have happened without Dee Dee Reilly. So those are just a couple of examples of the way she went about it. I'm very proud of the work she did, and it was very impactful, you know, what she did. And of course, on the volunteer side, she did all those things that you would expect. She was a volunteer in public schools and for numerous other nonprofits around the city. But it was really, in my view, when the embodiment of civic engagement is really being all in for both the people and the cause. And if you can put that magic together, you're going to have an impact on not only the community but real people's lives. So anyway, again, thank you for attending the Breaux Symposium. I know it's going to be a great program, and Janae and team, again, thanks for using Dee Dee Reilly as an example of what it means to be civically engaged. I know that she was certainly an example for me. Thanks again.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you just saw, Sean Reilly, who is part of the Reilly family, the namesake of the center that I direct here at the Manship School, talking about his mother. She happened to pass early on during COVID. It wasn't COVID, but we knew immediately that we wanted to focus this Breaux Symposium on her and her service. And you don't have to spend much time in Baton Rouge or in the state of Louisiana to know that the Reilly family, as well as the Lamars, they really contribute a lot to our communities, and they take the idea of investing in the community very seriously. So we're excited that we were able to do this. As Dr. Grimm mentioned, our center, it's really the outreach and engagement arm of the Manship School, and that means that what we do is we leverage, you know, the capacity that we have here in academia and work to apply some of those concepts within the community and work with the community so that it's really kind of the service piece of academia. And so it's really fun to be able to do that because there are not a lot of centers and entities within higher education that do that kind of work. And of course, everything that we do is to advance the Manship School on the state and national leadership in media and in politics. Today, so this symposium, it's been 2 years in the making, and one of the key elements of that is Dr. Katie Knobloch. She is our 2021, actually our 2020, 2021, 2021, 2022 Public Policy Fellow. And part of that is that she helped us develop the Community Collaborative. And this is a community capacity building program. She is an expert in doing this. And the first year it was just kind of laying the groundwork for that, and this year it's really systematizing it and kind of, you can never really perfect something, but we can definitely get it to run smoothly. So we're excited that she's gonna stay with us for the rest of this year. So Dr. Knobloch is a 2-time Manship School graduate with her bachelor's and master's degrees from here. She got her PhD at the University of Washington, and currently she is an associate professor at Colorado State University in the Department of Communication Studies. And her primary focus of research is on public participation, especially around the design and implementation of community engagement programs. So you can see why she's perfect for this. She's one of ours, and she's actually an expert. So she worked closely with our team, particularly an intern who graduated last year, Anna Block, who hopefully will join us later today, to develop this program. And the way that it worked is that we recruited, we had aimed for 15 participants. We got 30 of folks from across the state to participate in some training on, how do you identify issues in your community, how do you identify solutions, who do you need to work with, how do you find the resources to implement those solutions, and you have to make sure that that solution is something you can actually carry out. So anyone who finished that training was welcomed and invited to apply for a grant, and part of this was also working with folks who may never have submitted a grant application before. And so we got, I think, over 20 back from the group, and today we're going to hear from the 4 that were selected to receive a small $5,000 mini grant, and we'll get to hear how those things were implemented and the results. So beyond developing really great, impactful engagement programs, Dr. Knobloch is also, she's a distinguished scholar. She has received funding from the National Science Foundation, and her work has appeared in some important journals, and those are the Journal of Applied Communication Research, Political Studies, American Politics Research, Public Administration, and the International Journal of Communication. She's also published a book along with John Gastile, which is Hope for Democracy, How Citizens Can Bring Reason Back into Politics. And I think we can all, that resonates with all of us. So we're really grateful that we have Dr. Knobloch here, and I'm gonna turn this over to her so she can share with us her research as well as what she's been doing with the community collaborative that's beyond the community collaborative. It is wonky.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And I really want to start by saying a few thank yous. As Dr. Slocum mentioned, I'm an alumni of Manship. I got my undergrad and my master's degrees here, and it really is the place that made me realize that this type of work is possible. It was here that I first began to understand the central role that communication plays in democracy and in democratic empowerment, where I was first introduced to the problems facing our democracy, and where I first began to understand how I might work toward creating a better civic infrastructure. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. There are also a lot of specific people that I'd like to thank. Dr. Slocum has obviously been pivotal in bringing this work to light. It has been exciting and fun to work with her to develop this new program and to think through the ways that we might better empower Louisiana residents. Kelsey Sibley has been a resource throughout, providing the support structure that is really vital for this type of work. And your talented and committed students, including Anna, Sohail, and now Adam, each of whom have demonstrated a level of professionalism and a concern for their communities that I hope all students can emulate. And finally, truly my biggest thanks go out to the participants in the Community Collaborative. These are folks who have set aside their own time to learn more about how they can make their community a better place and who have put in the hard work to identify problems and to work with others in their communities to address them. They are perpetually inspiring, and I'm grateful to have the privilege of learning with them and of watching them work. All right, so what is the Community Collaborative? At its heart, it is a community training and engagement program designed to empower Louisiana residents and build the civic capacity needed to make our democracy function. Participants were recruited from across the state, representing diverse perspectives, identities, and positionalities. Some were nonprofit leaders or community advocates, hoping to sharpen their skills and better engage stakeholders. Some were students finding intersections between their studies and civic work. And many were just ordinary community members who simply wanted to make their community a better place. Ultimately, our inaugural cohort had 26 participants, all dedicated to doing the hard work of civic life. So during the first stage of the program, we implemented 3 training series. The first training really focused on different models of civic engagement, and I'll walk through those in a few minutes, but primarily focusing on advocacy, deliberation, and public work, and how those things might work together. Then we focused on civic skills, things like stakeholder analysis, power mapping, grant writing, that would better enable them to actually do the work. And then also we hope that it fostered some network development. So getting folks in the room across the state who are passionate about issues, developing relationships with one another that we hope extend beyond the confines of this program. After their trainings, as Dr. Slocum said, participants submitted mini grants. Ultimately, 4 grants were selected for funding, and you're going to get to hear from them later today. They were partnered with community advisors who could help them implement those projects, navigate bureaucracy, figure out additional sources of funding. And then they've worked for the past year to actually implement those projects and create some real change in their communities. Okay, so now that you know what the Community Collaborative is, I want to back up just a little bit in order to understand the program's objectives. So first, this program is rooted in community. Too often, we leave the work of democratic life to those who already hold power. The Community Collaborative is explicitly designed to empower community members. Community engagement is key to making democracy work. Governing ourselves is truly a big job, and in order to do that successfully, we need to understand the issues in front of us. We need to feel connected to others in our community and understand their needs and concerns. And we need to be engaged in ways that allow us to express our concerns, learn from one another, make our voices heard, and work together to solve problems. We hope that the Community Collaborative can better enable each of those tasks. But we also know, like I've said many times and will repeat throughout the day, this work can be hard. And it often requires a specific set of skills that we rarely have an opportunity to cultivate. So if community members can't talk to one another across difference, it's difficult to work with one another. If they hope to organize their communities, they need to develop a clear understanding of what it looks like and who is already doing the work. The more we can develop these skills in our communities, the better prepared we are for the challenges that we faced. And finally, we hoped to build community capacity. Community capacity takes lots of different forms, but it's the social fabric that allows us to work together as communities. We need leaders who listen to the public. We need strong community networks that both bond us with others who share our interests and bridge us with others across difference. We need the civic infrastructure that connects us beyond elections and that creates avenues for community members to express their concerns and work together to solve them. This type of civic capacity is not only vital to our democracy, but it also makes us better prepared to respond to moments of crisis. So if we think about the ways that the Louisiana community always continuously rallies together after major hurricanes, each step of organizing that is developed in previous hurricanes, such as meal distribution operations, mobile health stations, the Cajun Navy, they all make it easier to respond when the next hurricane comes. And in the face of disaster, they are better connected and mobilized to do the work of civic life that keeps communities going. Okay. Now that we've talked about our objectives, I'm going to jump back into the how. And I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about the trainings. Our first set of trainings focused on different models of engagement, like I mentioned, that participants might utilize. So Electoral politics are important. Everybody should vote. If you aren't registered, make sure you register. It is a vital part of our democracy. So it's not to say that electoral politics are not important, but too often we see electoral politics as the only means of engagement. And as I just discussed, democracy requires strong civic infrastructure that exists outside the bounds of elections. And there are three primary ways that I see that community members might engage in civic life. The first is advocacy. Advocacy focuses on expressing our concerns and our goals. And this is probably the model that most folks are familiar with. Advocacy takes place through protests and social movements, but it also takes place through interest groups and lobbying organizations. These are the types of engagement efforts that allow us to identify our common interests and then express those interests to decision makers. But advocacy alone is not enough. I know that many folks here have studied the dangers of what we call enclave communication. So when we only communicate with others who already hold our same positions. When we only talk to people who are just like us, we begin to lose sight of different perspectives, or those who are different from us. And it becomes easy to vilify people who disagree with us and more difficult to work together across difference. And so that's where deliberation comes in. Deliberation asks us to come together across difference, to have conversations with others in which we share our own experiences, learn about the experiences of others, and develop a mutual understanding of the big issues facing our communities. Unlike advocacy, which is goal-oriented, deliberation asks participants to focus on learning rather than winning. So deliberation often takes place through community forums or meetings, formal and highly structured processes that encourage deep listening and learning. But deliberation can also take place anytime people are engaged in a conversation about public life. It requires us to deeply analyze an issue, to acknowledge that there are multiple solutions, not just two, that require competing trade-offs. So we're often really good at identifying all the good things our solutions are going to do and all the bad things that our opponents are going to do. What we're not great at is acknowledging the consequences of the things that we support. And so deliberation asks us to acknowledge those trade-offs and to ultimately make decisions that are more inclusive, more informed, and sustainable because they've been developed in conversation with the wider community. It's where we truly look at an issue across perspective and attempt to develop decisions that are responsive to the needs of our entire community. Now, both of those models are great. I'm obviously a big fan of both of them. But they can both be critiqued for being all talk and no action, and that's where public work comes in. Public work is when we stop talking and we start doing. So you can think of things like volunteering and community organizing, organizations like the PTA or Bayou cleanups. These are spaces where we come together, to create material change in our communities. These types of projects can give community members real power to create change, whether that be creating a clean environment or purchasing a new reading program for schools. Moreover, this type of work actually connects our communities. So I'm sure all of you know the power that work can have to bond us. When we are focused on work, it becomes easier to bond over shared success or to commiserate over shared burdens. So public work can be a place that we develop real and sustained relationships with others and find faith in our capacity to work together. On its own, though, public work is often piecemeal, choosing to respond to immediate needs rather than looking at the systemic problems that our communities face. That's why we need all of these models of engagement. On their own, no method of engagement is enough. Together, they can really change the structure of communities and our potential to work together. So now I've mentioned our communities often lack this civic infrastructure, but we can build it. And I'm going to give you an example from my own work that demonstrates what this might look like in process. So for the past 4 years, I've been working with a local high school, Rocky Mountain High, on a public achievement program. And that program connects college students with high school students, and our college students go into the high schools and they train them in civic engagement. Towards the beginning of that work, we repeatedly heard from our high school students about problems of racism and inclusion at their school. In this sense, students were advocating for change. They were expressing to us, to their faculty, and to their administration that problems were happening at their school and change was needed. Students of color, LGBTQ students, students with disabilities, or who belong to non-dominant religions were feeling excluded by their peers and in their classes. So by expressing their concerns, they were advocating for change. In response to that, my students, who are all trained in facilitation, came to their school to help them deliberate about these problems. They engaged in collective discussions to identify the places in their school that most needed improvement and to brainstorm solutions to those problems. Students identified the need to better respond to mental health. They suggested that organizations needed to be better connected. And they really identified the classroom as a place where they needed a better sense of inclusion. So ultimately, students chose to address that classroom environment problem. They developed student-teacher partnerships in which students and teachers could talk to one another and collectively brainstorm about how to adapt lesson plans or their class environment so that students could learn about and discuss issues of identity. They developed training modules for teachers in which students talked very candidly about times that they'd felt discriminated in the classroom and identified best practices for teachers hoping to create change in their own class environments. And they also introduced a school-wide lesson plan that allowed students to think about their own identities and the impact that they have on their experiences and their sense of inclusion. And now we're starting the whole cycle again. On Wednesday, yesterday actually, my students prepared our high school students to host conversations with their peers that would enable them to understand the issues facing their wider community and advocate and work towards long-term change, right? So it never stops. We always have to keep going. Okay. Hopefully by now I've made it clear that there are a myriad of ways that we can engage our communities. But it takes more than will to do this work. It takes specific skills. And even the best intentions will get us nowhere if we don't recognize the seriousness of the tasks in front of us and the difficulty truly of both mobilizing our communities and implementing public projects. To that end, the Community Collaborative was designed not only to introduce participants to models of engagement, but to equip them to enact them. So one of the primary skills that we focused on was stakeholder analysis and power mapping. Stakeholder analysis asks us to identify those members of a community who are most impacted by an issue or who have the power to create change in relation to that issue. Stakeholder work is imperative for community organizing and is often the first thing that you're going to do if you want to mobilize your community. Advocating for change requires demonstrating community will, and through a stakeholder analysis, you can get a clearer picture of who in the community might be willing to join your coalition. By simply identifying these groups isn't enough. So we also ask cohort members to engage in some power mapping. Power mapping is when you begin to identify what resources different groups might bring to the table. So one organization might have a strong network that can generate volunteers or encourage residents to attend a protest. Another might be great at grant writing or fundraising. Another might offer media support or physical space. They might have the tools or materials you need for a project or connect you with decision makers or government officials who will need to approve the work. Power mapping asks you to be clear about who is in your community, what resources they might bring to the table, and how you might connect with them to work towards change. So in addition to power mapping, we also introduce participants to deliberative facilitation, and this is my wheelhouse. Facilitation skills allow you to talk with others in your community, particularly, like I said, across difference. Now, the most important facilitation skill is always listening. As you all know, much of our media and civic environment focuses on expression, and social media is a great example of this. So platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, they allow us to tell others how we feel, but they often devolve into millions of people shouting into the wind, no one listening and asking questions. Facilitation asks us to really understand other people's perspectives and to do the opposite. You start by listening and asking questions. At the end of a facilitated discussion, you shouldn't necessarily have changed your mind, but you should have developed a broader and deeper understanding of an issue that allows you to make better collective decisions. So in our trainings, we focused on asking questions that would allow you to understand others' positions, and we spent time developing skills for paraphrasing and reframing. So through things like reframing, we can respond to someone's passion without turning it into an argument. So rather than responding with anger when we disagree with someone or trying to convince them why you are right and they are wrong, reframing asks us to think about, what does that person actually care about? So for example, if someone is vaccine hesitant, they might be expressing distrust for government. If they are opposed to new offshore drilling sites, they may be concerned about environmental protections for future generations. Reframing asks us to really identify those concerns and talk through them so that we can better understand both the root of our disagreements and the places where we might find some common ground. So through these conversations, we begin to move away from polarization and toward one another, ultimately enabling collaboration across difference. Finally, participants were introduced to the all-important skill of grant writing. I'm sure we all know that change often requires funding. And in my experience, grant writing skills are often needed if we want to be realistic about creating change. But aside from simply generating funding, grant writing is also important for getting clear about the work in front of us. For me, this is often the place where ideas move from an idea to something that's more realistic. Calls for funding generally require us to be clear about the problems we hope to address, getting as specific as possible about its scope and scale, and offering evidence that our proposed solution will work. They require us to identify partnerships that we will need to develop and to anticipate barriers to implementation. It asks us to create a timeline and a step-by-step plan for our projects and a budget that will address things like, how do I pay contractors or how do I afford equipment? In short, grant writing can help get us organized, clear, and realistic, and to develop a concrete and achievable plan. All right, so the trainings in the parlance of academics ask participants to explore both the theory of civic life and the practice of civic engagement. So in the end, we asked cohort members to submit mini grants for their projects that connected them with their communities and which utilized the wisdom and the power of their communities to address pressing public problems. Ultimately, 4 grants were chosen for funding, and in just a few minutes, I'm super excited, you'll get to hear from those grantees about their work. Before we get to that, however, I want to talk about what we learned through the Community Collaborative. So as a faculty at a research university, we have the great privilege of spending our time learning and exploring how our world works, hopefully with the purpose of advancing our common interests. And the Community Collaborative was no different, and research is an important part of the work that we are doing here. So after the trainings were complete, we began to interview cohort members to understand why they chose to engage and to allow them to evaluate the program. So one of our graduate students, Sohail, spoke with cohort members, and I'm going to offer some preliminary findings from this work. So when we asked folks, why do you want to do this work, we learned a lot about our community members. First, community members are experts in their own communities. They know about the problems that communities are facing. They know who is working in their communities. They know what solution might work for this specific neighborhood or this specific issue or this specific school, right? So our community members can offer a wealth of expertise that we can't get through other avenues. Moreover, they are eager to do the work. Folks want these type of trainings. They want opportunities to improve their communities. You know, like Janae said, we were hoping for 15 folks and we got 30. Right? So offering these opportunities is vital to enabling them to do the work, and they want more trainings. One of the things that we heard, and I'll mention this a little bit later, is that now I want a training on this. Well, I want to go deeper into grant writing. I want to go deeper into advocacy. I want to go deeper into whatever it might be. So they're looking for those opportunities to build their civic skills. During the project, participants learned a few things. So one is they learned to hone their ideas. Whether you're a grad student or somebody who wants to do work in the community, this is a big deal, right? How do we move from this grand idea to something that's really actionable and implementable? So the program allowed participants to hone their ideas and move from that big idea to something that we could actually do. They also learned to tap into and connect with their communities. Like I said, identifying others who are already doing the work, learning from them, figuring out how they could pool their resources in order to do this work bigger and better. And finally, they started thinking systematically about engagement, right? They started understanding the work that is required of civic engagement, the time, the planning, the resources that are needed for this type of work. And that allows you to think more clearly about how you can do that work moving forward. So this research is ongoing, and we'll be conducting interviews soon with the grantees and their advisors, as well as other community members that they worked with. But for now, we're using these interviews to improve the collaborative moving forward. So a few lessons that we learned. One, like I said, one is that they'd like space for more direct, personalized feedback, and this is something that I'm hearing a lot in trainings. Folks want an opportunity to talk with others, learn from one another, create that mutual learning community that allows them to share their ideas and hear direct feedback on them. And like I said, they also want to increase specialization. So thinking about how we can better hone this for specific issues, for specific types of communities, for specific types of engagement. All right. We're also going to be recruiting a new cohort very soon. So in about a week or so, we'll start soliciting new members for the cohort. And once again, we're looking for folks who have a good idea who want to improve their communities. So whether they are working to develop a new nonprofit or they simply have a great idea, we want to identify the folks who would benefit from this type of training. And by training them, we hope that they would advance Louisiana's capacity for civic life. So we'll be hosting our second round of trainings in April and funding a new round of projects that will be implemented over the summer. And like I said, we're going to continue this research moving forward, hoping to identify best practices for civic training and learning how we can best meet the needs of cohort members and Louisiana's residents. All right. By now, you have heard plenty from me about how all of this works. So now it's time to hear directly from our grantees. I am so proud, although I can't take too much credit for the work that they have accomplished, and thrilled truly to have them here with us. We've been all online, so it's great to see some faces in person. The first is Gardeer Proud, and this is led by Dr. Muriel Harrison, Reginald Brown, and now Daryl Meredith. And it's a litter mobilization and neighborhood education program that develops a pattern of behavior, modeling, and awareness to encourage proper trash takeout procedures and reduce litter in Baton Rouge's Gardeer neighborhood. We'll also hear about Natchez Pecan Park, led by Carol Chin. And this establishes a full-size basketball park in Pecan Park in Natchez for use by the community where recreational facilities are limited. Give a Child a Chance is led by Morgan Washington and Kathleen Stewart Ritchie. And it has CART-appointed Special Advocates of Louisiana, which you might know as CASA Louisiana, partnering with the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services to form focus groups to understand why individuals and families choose to become CASA volunteers and foster parents, and Project Enable, led by Liam Doyle. And the purpose of that is to share the experiences of those with disabilities with a larger audience to both highlight the particular challenges of residents living with disabilities and bring an element of personalization to the advocacy for the issues faced by that community. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Harrison to begin our first presentation from the grantees.
Okay. Thank you. We are so excited to be here today to talk about our project. I want to tell you a little bit about the Gardeer community. Gardeer is only 3.39 square miles and has over 13,000 people. That means that there are over 3,000 people for each square mile. That's a lot of people. And with that, we also have litter. So the goals of our project was to show SkySail. There are about 13 streets in Gardeer, and we chose SkySail because it has both duplex on one side and fourplexes on the other side. So we thought it would be a good idea to kind of see what happens when you have that mixed homes. Okay, so we wanted to show SkySail residents how removing trash cans from the street improves the appearance of the community. One of the things that happens when we moved into Gardeer was to notice that the trash cans always stayed to the end of the street. And we wanted to just show how it would improve the appearance if you just pulled them back. But one of the things we realized too is that there really wasn't a dedicated space in front of the fourplex to comfortably put the trash cans. To show SkySail residents that picking up litter, not throwing litter, improves street appearance, and to develop street cooperativeness to address bulk trash. Because there are apartments and the residents are transitional, oftentimes people are leaving, and so they discard their furniture or leftovers at the end of the street, or sometimes they are evicted and the property owners put the trash there, or sometimes we found out that people just come into the neighborhood and dump bulk trash. So those are the issues that we were trying to deal with this project. We were really pleased to be selected for this. On SkyCell, there were 60 duplexes on one side, and then 16 fourplex and 32 duplexes on the other side, just to kind of give you an idea of what this street is like. For our partners, we were really pleased to have the South Burbank Crime Prevention and Development District. This one is critical to our work because it's funds from the owners, property owners. They give $5 or $10 per year for each of their units, and that money is redistributed to organizations such as ours so that we can do things to improve the community. Also, it enables law enforcement protection. Ms. Karen Lee is the president of that, and we have an excellent partnership. We have Baton Rouge Neighborhood Revitalization Department, and this is a group also that works very closely with us. Seat at the Table is a nonprofit, and they mainly belong to St. Jude Catholic Church, and they have funds that are dedicated to helping the community, and so they help to participate in our joint cleanups. The SkyCell residents, of course, were involved. Faith Chapel is one of the congregations that is a stakeholder in the Gardere Initiative. Gardere Initiative is a nonprofit, community-based, faith-based, and we are comprised of the congregations that surround the community. Then we have EBR, Keep Louisiana Clean. This is Gwen Emmerich. She has funds for gloves, bags, water, the grabbers to pick up the litter, and that was very helpful when we had the large cleanup. And then there's Hermitage Crime Prevention District, which is a neighbor of ours right on the other side of Gardere Lane. So these were our project partners, and who I don't see on, I'm left over because I thought they were very critical, and that was Emergent Method. Emergent Method, I don't know how they were partnered with us, but it was really good because our city councilman also works for Emergent Method. And so he has a personal investment, and we have been knowing Rowdy Goday for some time because he used to be an assistant to the mayor. And he used to do cleanups with us as the assistant to the mayor, and then when he became our councilman, he just continued doing that kind of work. And so it was a great partnership. So these were some of the tasks that we identified. To pull the trash cans back. We just wanted to show the neighbors, if you just pull the trash cans, what it would do to beautify the street. We also had doorknob hangers to teach people. In the last census, we had over 13,000 people. 13% are immigrants, and we think in our community is really a larger proportion than that. But what the reason I'm pointing this out is that our neighborhood is transient, and people don't always understand maybe what we take for granted. For instance, you're supposed to arrange your garbage cans 3 feet apart from each other. But if you try to imagine it, if you have two fourplexes, then that means that's 8 trash cans that you are supposed to put 3 feet apart, and it blocks the driveway. But that was one of the things with the doorknob hangers, is that we were just trying to inform the neighbors that one of the things you need to do is sometimes your can wasn't picked up just because it was too close and the truck came in with those robotic arms and just could not pick it up. Or if it was too close to the light posts. Or if sometimes if you don't have a top on your can, the garbage truck doesn't necessarily have to pick it up. You're supposed to call 311 and get a replacement. So we had all this information on the door hangers, and we had to put it in English and in Spanish so that all of our residents would understand what you're supposed to do. We gave them information about DPW and 311. When you're another thing we found out is that, and because of COVID, even in the best of neighborhoods, sometimes the trash was not picked up. But in Gardere, it was very almost traditional that it wasn't going to be picked up at some time or another. And then you had Hurricane Ida that came and compounded the problem. And but anyway, these are just some issues that came up. We did 2 cleanups, major cleanups, and what that meant is people like Seat at the Table, some from Hermitage, Faith Chapel, they came together and helped us to really get the bulk trash. And we partnered with DPW to do that. So we started in July, and we went on through August, and then all the way from September to February. So we were really pleased to have the extra time so that we could continue with the young men who were helping us pick up this trash. This is what it looks like when I say bulk trash. Sometimes, especially this area right here, it was you can't see it, but it's in front of a vacant lot. And we feel that there were people who just purposely came and dumped their trash there. We had to do this like several times, clean it up before they finally got the message. But this was on our first cleanup day in July. These are some of the people who helped. Our young people came out. It was a really good time. And yeah, we got some of the neighbors got involved because we had the picking up the rakes, and we were really happy. One of the property owners used his truck and carried some of the trash away. So that was very helpful. This is what it looked like afterwards. This was really pleasing to see the finished product. This is a celebration, and so we had asked to have pizza, and it really helped to build relationships with the residents. Changing behavior takes time and involves relationship. We need to speak to both our English and Spanish residents. I think this is what I want to just move forward because my time is up. I want to tell you the real lasting impact of this project is that we hired 5 boys to come every week and pick up trash. They are now involved in other activities that we have. And someone has already put up money to continue doing this so that those young men can be involved. So when you talk about community engagement, you know, we started out with one objective, or the objective was to beautify, clean up the litter, but we ended up having relationships with these 5 young boys, and we were really pleased about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. So next up, we are going to hear from Carol Chin. She was unable to join us today, but she did send in her presentation narrated for us. So I'm going to play that for everyone so that we can learn a little bit about Natchez Pecan Park.
Today I'm going to be providing an update on the Community Collaborative Project in Natchez, Louisiana to install a new basketball court in Pecan Park. The purpose of this project was to provide new recreational opportunities for both children and adults in the village of Natchez. And to accomplish this, we proposed rehabilitating a portion of the old tennis court area in Pecan Park to serve as a regulation-sized basketball court. The village of Natchez is located approximately 7 miles south of Natchez in Natchez Parish. It's a small rural community of about 580 people. The lack of access to recreational facilities, healthy food, and reliable transportation are common issues in rural communities, and Natchez is no exception. Pecan Park is located on Main Street in Natchez, and it provides the only recreational facilities in the village of Natchez. There's no public transportation between Natchez and Natchez, so this is really the only easily accessible place for recreational facilities. The old tennis courts haven't been used in many years, but that area is located on higher ground and includes updated LED lighting, which provides the opportunity for use in the evenings. Project participants include Mayor Rosa Humphrey, Alderman Sheila Johnson, and the Village of Natchez Town Council, as well as various community volunteers. Last time I gave an update on this project, I received several questions about the demographics in Natchez. This slide shows the age distribution of people in the village of Natchez from the U.S. Census Bureau's 2019 American Community Survey. It shows that the median age is 32.8 years in Natchez, and from the data on the left, you can see that more than 50% of the population is age 34 or younger. So Pecan Park already includes a playground area which serves small children, but we wanted to install some kind of facilities in the park that would serve a greater proportion of the population. Initial goals for this project are, as I mentioned, to enhance access to recreational facilities within the Natchez community. And to do this, we decided to rehabilitate a portion of the old tennis court area to provide a regulation-sized basketball court. The photo on the right shows what the tennis court area looked like at the time the proposal was submitted. This is an old asphalt area. It's on a raised platform, and it hadn't been used as tennis courts in quite some time. You can see that grass has started to grow up through the asphalt. So the process that we planned was to clean the asphalt surface, to patch and fill it as needed. That means removing the grass and then filling cracks, remaining cracks as needed. To purchase and install new basketball goals, and then to paint lines for a full-size basketball court. The project also includes funds to construct and install a footbridge that would provide better access and a better connection between the new basketball court and the existing playground. This is an aerial view of a portion of Pecan Park. On the left, you can see Main Street, and on the right, upper right, is the old tennis court area, which is the proposed area for the new basketball court. The lower right is where the playground is, and the dark line that crosses from the upper left to the center right is a drainage ditch. So as part of the project, we proposed to build a small footbridge to help cross that drainage ditch and to make a better connection between the new basketball court and the playground. So some of the issues we've had along the way, there were some initial problems ordering the basketball goals. Those were resolved by speaking directly with the owner of the company. The old asphalt needed to be cleaned, but we didn't want to cause further deterioration of the surface. So we discussed several different ways of cleaning that surface. And then the asphalt area actually is not square. And of course, a basketball court needs to be square, and you need to have things centered appropriately. So there were a few challenges there. And then after looking at all those factors, Mayor Humphrey felt that the project would be more successful if the concrete pad were laid for the basketball court. This required approvals from the town council, and it also required scheduling a contractor to pour the concrete. This resulted in some delays, but ultimately I think it's going to be a better project for it. And then last, anchors for the basketball goals were mistakenly placed in the wrong locations. So, current updates, the basketball goals were delivered in mid-October. The area was measured and court borders and the goal locations were marked. The Village of Natchez Town Council approved the concrete pad. That was then laid in January of this year. Anchors for the basketball goals were installed a few weeks later. And as I mentioned, the goals were installed in their incorrect locations on the sides of the courts rather than at the ends. This is a photo of the concrete pad that was laid for the basketball court. I've marked it with the length and the width. The length is 95 feet and the width is 50 feet. You can sort of make out on the left side of the photo and the right side of the photo where the anchors for the basketball goals have been placed. So we're working on relocating those to either end so that it's a 95-foot long court with basketball goals on either end, so it would be a full-size court. So our next steps, working with the mayor to place new anchors in the correct locations so that we have a full-size basketball court. This requires purchasing replacement anchors. We are requesting estimates for the cost of placing those anchors. And then we're going to, once we have estimates that we're happy with, we're going to mark the correct locations on the concrete for the anchors and for the rest of the court. We will need to probably reallocate funds that were designated for the footbridge and for cleaning and patching the asphalt so that we can offset the cost of placing new anchors in the correct locations. Once they're placed, we'll be able to install the basketball goals and finish painting lines on the court, and then hopefully the court will be ready for use. So just some final thoughts. Though progress seems slow, the basketball court is coming along. It's looking really good, I think, and I think it's actually looking much better with the concrete pad than it would have with the asphalt surface just cleaned up. The grant funding through the Reilly Center and the initiation of the project has actually provided impetus for further rehabilitation, not just of the park, but of additional facilities in the village of Natchez. The mayor has plans to lay concrete for a volleyball court adjacent to the basketball court that we're working on, and also for a smaller basketball court for younger children. And we've also been speaking about additional improvements to community resources. In particular, we've been looking at the cleanup and rehabilitation of an old gymnasium, which is part of the old Natchez Elementary School. A portion of that building is currently being used for the Natchez City Hall, but it's really in need of repairs, both the area that's being used for City Hall and the old gymnasium. And the gymnasium itself would provide an indoor recreation area. It would provide meeting space for the city and also event space for the village of Natchez. So that is something that we're talking about and looking into working on in the future. So some acknowledgments here. Thank you to the Reilly Center for Media and Public Affairs for their support of this project. Thanks also to Ms. Rebecca Blankenbaker, who's the Executive Director of Cane River National Heritage Area, and Mr. Van Erickson, who's the Director of Recruiting at Northwestern State University. They are both serving as project advisors. Thank you.
Okay, so next up we have Morgan Washington with Give a Child a Chance, Louisiana CASA.
Hi, so my name is Morgan Washington, and today I'm going to be talking to y'all about the project Give a Child a Chance, Advocate, Foster, and Make an Impact. So before I get too far into the actual project, I would like to explain a little bit about child welfare in Louisiana to kind of give you a better understanding of why this project was needed. So children who experience abuse and neglect are removed from their home and are placed into a protective service by the state. So this service is called foster care and is provided to children by the Department of Children and Family Services. So foster care is a temporary arrangement in which an adult volunteers to provide for the care of a children or sibling group when their biological home is no longer deemed safe. As I said, foster care is temporary and adoption is permanent, so those are completely different. And the Child Welfare Division of the Department of Children and Family Services is who recruits and trains and oversees foster caregivers, which is the title of someone who volunteers to take in these children. So once a child is in foster care, they have to go through certain court hearings, and then a juvenile judge will appoint a court-appointed special advocate, also known as CASA. And so a CASA volunteer helps to secure safe and permanent homes for these children. They investigate and monitor cases involving children, and a CASA volunteer provides a judge with a carefully researched background and details and court reports about the child to help the court and the judge make a very sound decision in this child's life. And since there are over 4,000 children in foster care in Louisiana right now, Louisiana cannot keep up and provide these services to all of the foster children. So, like we just talked about, right now we do not have enough CASA volunteers or enough foster caregivers in this state. And so what does that look like? When there aren't enough foster caregivers or CASA volunteers in a community, a child may have to move to a different community, and they also won't have someone advocating for their best interest in court. So research shows that children do better in family homes that provide a safe environment and an opportunity for the child to heal while also maintaining contact with their biological family. DCFS does make efforts to place children near their biological family so they can stay with their friends, stay at the same school, etc. But if a foster caregiver is not available within their original community, they do have to move to a different community where a foster caregiver is readily available. And for CASA, children removed from their home because of abuse and neglect already face a very scary unknown. A lot of times they're younger and they don't understand what's happening, or if they are older, they completely understand what's happening, and that can be even worse. So CASA volunteers help these children thrive, and we bring a one-on-one relationship with them. So CASA volunteers are different because we aren't paid by the state. So while they might have multiple attorneys or social workers, a CASA volunteer will stay with the child throughout the entire case. So they always have that one person that they can always go back to no matter what. And research shows that children with a CASA volunteer find a permanent home quicker or are placed back with their biological family quicker. They spend less time in foster care, are more likely to succeed in school, and half as likely to re-enter foster care. So as a state, if we aren't providing these services, a lot of times children can get lost in the cracks just because it is so overwhelming right now. So the project we wanted for Give a Child a Chance was we wanted to address the need for additional foster caregivers and CASA volunteers. And how we wanted to do this was we wanted to have, it was going to require significant community outreach and community involvement. Louisiana CASA proposed to partner with the Department of Children and Family Services to recruit community members to serve as foster caregivers and CASA volunteers. Give a Child a Chance brought together current foster caregivers and current CASA volunteers, caring community members, and child welfare agencies to discuss and educate on the ongoing need of both of these roles. So the initial phase of Give a Child a Chance was holding focus groups with current foster caregivers and current CASA volunteers. We held these focus groups to identify the motivation to serve, as well as challenges in serving in both of these roles and why they continue to stay in these roles. Information from these focus groups were then used to create the public awareness strategies, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and recruitment efforts to attract suitable adults to become foster caregivers and/or CASA volunteers. So Louisiana CASA partnered with DCFS to schedule, advertise, and conduct 2 public information sessions to recruit foster caregivers, and this included CASA staff and current CASA DCFS staff as well. And we wanted to develop, or we did develop a presentation as well between all of us, and also using the information that we gained from the focus groups to design a presentation basically to motivate community members to get involved and give a child a chance, thus leading to more foster caregivers and CASA volunteers. Whenever we first reached out to DCFS to partner on this project, a location had not been decided yet. After further discussion and looking at both of our data, we did decide to hold it in DCFS Region 4, which is the Thibodeau region. It's the blue region on this map up here. And it is comprised of Ascension, Assumption, Lafourche, St. Charles, St. John, St. James, and Terrebonne Parish. And of these parishes, Lafourche and Terrebonne have the highest number of children in foster care, which is why we chose to hold these public meetings here. And this is just some additional data that we were able to pull when we were deciding on the location. And also we wanted to accurately advertise and educate on the need of foster care. And so as you can see here, 62% of the children in foster care just in Region 4 come from Terrebonne and Lafourche Parish. And then here, these charts show the amount of children in foster care in Terrebonne and Lafourche Parish for the past 7 years. As you can see, it has been on a steady increase for the past few years, with the exception of 2020. This is largely due to the fact that children were not being seen by mandated reporters as often, so teachers, doctors, things like that. So the amount of child abuse cases significantly went down, or at least the reporting of it did. But preliminary data of 2021 shows that it will probably be back around what we saw in 2019. So who's involved? So as for CASA, Louisiana CASA, which is the state organization of CASA, as well as the 2 local programs, which would be CASA of Terrebonne and CASA of Lafourche. And then we also had our current CASA volunteers for our focus groups. For DCFS, we had the state office, the regional office, which would be Region 4, and then current foster parents. And then our advisors were Monique Crochet. She's the Executive Director of External Affairs at Nicholls State University. Mark Danos, owner and executive at Danos, a previous foster caregiver and current adoptive parent. And then John Weibel, who is the President and CEO for the Center for Development and Learning. And each of them provided their professional and personal insight on the implementation and execution of this project. So like I had mentioned, the major goal was to recruit more CASA volunteers, more foster families, and also learn about why people sign up for this role, what entices them to actually go through this training, and then actually carry out this role, because it is a big ask. And our hope for this was once we were able to provide more CASA volunteers and foster caregivers, that we'd be able to provide more of these services to children, and overall, children would be able to have a better chance of developing resilience and growing up into happier and healthier adults. So like I previously mentioned, we knew that this was going to be difficult because both of these roles are very big ask for a community member. You do have to meet certain requirements. You have to pass a criminal background check. You have to go through a very in-depth training process. For a CASA volunteer, you have to have time. You have to go visit your child. You have to go to court hearings. And for a foster caregiver, you have an additional child in your home. You have to have extra space in your house. You know, you have to be able to care for this child. So another obstacle was Hurricane Ida. Hurricane Ida hit in late August and was a Category 4 hurricane, and it majorly affected both Terrebonne and Lafourche Parish. All of these pictures are from Hurricane Ida in either Terrebonne and Lafourche. We had to put a very long hold on our project. Our staff and the DCFS staff had a lot bigger issues to worry about at the time. We needed to check in with all the foster caregivers, check in with all of our foster kids, make sure that they were safe, see who evacuated, see who didn't. We have to report that to the court wherever the child is. So we did have to put a hold on this project. And this was just some data that I got from the parish government, saying 80% of structures received some type of damage and 50% had been substantially damaged in Lafourche, and then 90% of structures had received some type of damage in Terrebonne, and 60% had been substantially damaged in Terrebonne. And we knew this was going to be difficult because in our project we are asking the community to volunteer their time for someone else and not necessarily us giving back directly to the community. So this was our revised timeline. Initially, when we first started this project, we did want to have everything done by December. But whenever Ida hit, we just had to, like I said, completely put that on hold. We did hold our focus groups in November. December and January were a lot of planning. January, we hosted the 2 meetings and so forth. So the goal overall was just to provide insight onto how to best recruit, resulting in an influx of foster caregivers and having a direct impact on meeting the children, or direct impact on the children in Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish. So the first part, we held the focus groups. We partnered with our local DCFS and local CASA to recruit who they would see fit for the focus groups. They picked a very diverse group of participants from different backgrounds. They had been in their roles for different times, so we got a lot of great insight from that. We also created pre-surveys that were very multiple choice. How did you hear about us? Ranking your experience, the training experience, etc. And then the focus groups themselves we did hold virtually. It was very open-ended questions and them asking or them telling us their experience as a CASA volunteer and foster caregiver in a very open setting. So this is I might have just repeated myself on that one. Sorry. So the next stage was public awareness. We took everything that we learned from the focus groups, and then we moved that into a public awareness campaign. So whenever they were talking about why they chose to volunteer with us or why they chose to sign up for an orientation or training, we really focused on that. I did create a little bit of branding for this project. Obviously, the title is Give a Child a Chance, and the tagline is Advocate, Foster, Make an Impact. Advocate is in CASA Red, Foster is in DCFS Blue, and Make an Impact was honestly just a nice color, but someone did point out that it looks like LSU, so we're going to go with that. So go Tigers. And the public awareness part was going to be a really big part about this project because a lot of people, especially in smaller communities, do not know what CASA is, do not know what DCFS does, and if they do, they probably don't have a good opinion of it. So we created these flyers again with our tagline, and it has some stats, it has information about the meeting. And then on this other side, you can see this half-page handout. One side is all about what is foster care, how do foster caregivers help children, and how do foster caregivers make an impact. And the same is on the other side, except just for CASA. And again, just same branding, having the different organizations' logos. And then we also started to brainstorm about where would we put these flyers, where are people in the community going, how can we get the word out. And then here, so I held monthly meetings with the different CASA programs, with DCFS, and with our 3 advisors. This hot mess of a Google worksheet was our sheet that we would come together and take notes on. We would just drop ideas. So you can see that we have, when we were talking about our dates and our venue and different media outlets that we're going to reach out to. And then again, different civic groups and different organizations and churches and everything like that, different schools that we thought could help get the word out. And then right here, you're going to see the webpage that I created for the event. This is on the Louisiana CASA website. And it just has information about each of the individual meetings, information about what a CASA volunteer is, what a foster caregiver is, what goes into that, the requirements, frequently asked questions, everything else. So initially we were going to just do one campaign, but after meeting with our advisors and the other stakeholders in this project, we did decide it would be best to implement an awareness campaign first. So these are some of the social media posts that we created for the awareness campaign. Again, creating the coordinating colors with the coordinating organization. And the awareness campaign was mainly focused on what is CASA and what is a CASA volunteer, and again for what is DCFS and what is a foster caregiver. And then again, the requirements and the roles and responsibilities. These were also ran as social media ads and targeted towards people in those areas who were also over the age of 21, because that's the requirement for both roles. And then again, so this would actually be our recruitment campaign. The recruitment campaign will be focused on mainly what each does and the large need of each role in the community. I also chose this wording because I wanted to change people's thoughts about volunteering with these organizations. A lot of people assume you need to have a background in child welfare or unlimited time, but you really don't, and I wanted to amplify that message during this campaign. So foster caregivers and CASA volunteers are just ordinary people from all walks of life who just do extraordinary work and have really big hearts, and that's kind of what I wanted to hone in on this part. And these were also targeted social media ads. So as you can see here, our outreach efforts were pretty successful, at least for a nonprofit organization like myself. So the Give a Child a Chance webpage was the second most popular page on the Louisiana CASA website for 2 months straight. And the chart below, or this first chart at the top, is specifically our analytics from December 15th through January 15th, and the page alone had 224 unique visitors in a 30-day time span. And then our Facebook traffic also quadrupled during the same time. So at this point, I was really excited and really counting on a great turnout. In preparation for the meeting, I put together folders for the participants. So they included the original flyer that I previously showed you, as well as the half-page handout. It included CASA's statewide and local annual data, and DCFS statewide and regional annual data, as well as a contact page for their local CASA and DCFS office, and then a blank page if they needed to jot notes down, because we were having a Q&A session towards the end of each presentation. And each set of folders were personalized for that area, so the meeting in Lafourche had Lafourche data and contact information, and then the same for Terrebonne. So the Lafourche meeting was on January 18th at Nicholls State University, and the Terrebonne meeting was on January 25th at Fletcher Community College. So here you will see myself and our local CASA staff member, Jenny. We also created, you can also see the presentation that myself and the stakeholders had worked on. We also had a little table out with refreshments and the folders that I just spoke about, as well as some like goodies that they could take home. And then at each of the meetings were myself, a local CASA staff member from the coordinating parish, and then a regional DCFS staff member. Basically, I would present the slideshow, and then towards the end, we had a Q&A session, and the local staff would answer the questions. And I chose to set it up this way because I wanted both organizations to be represented, and for participants to be able to put a face with their local organization. So after all of that, no one showed up to either of the meetings. And I would be lying if I said I was not very disappointed and upset. I felt really bad for all of the people who put in so much hard work for this project, and even worse for the children who would still be without a CASA volunteer or foster caregiver. And all of these people who worked on this project took time out of their life to help me because they really believed in this project and believe it would make an impact in their community. And I definitely felt like I had let a lot of people down. So that being said, and after I moped around for a solid few days, I was able to see some good come from this project. I received a lot of really great insight and feedback about the local programs and what volunteers felt like their experiences were with each organization, and how we could better improve our training and make it more accessible to people. So that was really insightful. I heard a lot of good and bad from the volunteers in each role. So DCFS and CASA have both come together to create a plan on how we can make each of our organizations better, and also make it a more collaborative environment, especially since we all work so closely together. We want to be able to create the best experience for our volunteers and keep them volunteers as long as we can, and work on our retention rates. And we have also started a collaboration work group committee between CASA and DCFS to work on that collaboration. And we are currently sending out surveys through a third-party service to all of the CASA volunteers and foster caregivers in the state of Louisiana to get their feedback and see how we could better improve our organizations. So personal reflection, I was asked to share this for this, and if I'm being completely transparent with you, this is my first grant and my first implementation of a grant. And honestly, it was really difficult, but I am so thankful for the CASA staff and DCFS volunteers and the Reilly Center and all of my advisors who helped me along the way. I also made a lot of really great connections that have already agreed to assist in future projects, and we're already planning on partnering with other organizations, including the Heart Gallery and Fostering Hope Louisiana, to expand this project and use all of our resources instead of just CASA and DCFS. It was also really fascinating getting to talk and learn from other people who care so much about a topic that I'm passionate about, and getting to talk with other CASA volunteers and other foster caregivers, and also see things from their viewpoint. And this project also gave me a lot of valuable experience on how I can better recruit CASA volunteers at a statewide and local level. Recruiting is vastly different depending on where you are located, and I'm very thankful to have received so much feedback and insight, and will definitely use it in my future recruitment efforts. This unfortunately did end up being a trial and error project, but I am thankful for this experience and everything I learned along the way. I am already working with CASA of Lafourche and CASA of Terrebonne on other recruitment projects, and hopefully those will be a little more successful. And like I had mentioned earlier, we are looking at partnering with other organizations who are focused on either child welfare or foster care in Louisiana to revamp this project and try again, as well as bring this project into other areas in Louisiana. So thank you all for joining me today and learning a little bit about Give a Child a Chance. Again, thank you for the Reilly Center, Casa of Lafourche, Casa Terrebonne, DCFS, and all of my advisors. Thanks.
Thank you, Morgan, and I am excited to share our next grantee project, Liam Doyle with Project Enable. Liam actually just moved to Tampa, so he recorded his presentation for us, and I'm going to play that now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Liam Doyle. I'm the project manager for Project Enable, and that project came about because my background is in disability affairs and disability awareness. I spent a lot of time in Lafayette doing a lot of outreach programs and meeting really great people. And so that led me to realize that there are a lot of stories out there that need to be told and a lot of perspectives that need to be shared. When I was working with LCG back in from 2015 to 2020, like I said, I met a lot of people and there were a lot of really awesome perspectives, but also mine was one that got shared often because I was in a public eye. And I realized that right away, that a lot of people would come to me with different questions about people with disabilities and you know, to speak to their groups and membership programs, that kind of thing. And I really wanted to share that spotlight. So I created Project Enable as a grant to get other people that are local to the Acadiana area to speak about their experiences about living with a disability, about employment with a disability, about education, and all sort of these very important tentpole issues that people who have disabilities live and go through every day, and just to get different opinions and different ideas. So what I was able to do was to take the grant money and say, we have X number of participants. In this case, I believe we ended up with 8, and we sat them down and gave them a half hour to either answer questions that I had come up with them beforehand, or in some cases, just let them speak and share their stories and share their thoughts on different topics and things like that. And really what it allowed us to do was give an opportunity to say, you know, this is your time. You have what ended up being a half hour each of recording time that we did back in December, and talk about whatever you want. Talk about how you got to be disabled. Were you disabled from birth? Was it something that happened later in life? You know, what does your disability mean to you? What kind of challenges do you face every day? You know, stuff like that, just to get them really comfortable with the idea of getting their voices and advocating for themselves, and while also advocating for others, was really important to me. So I really wanted to be able to take that time to give them a chance to, as I said, share their own stories. So when I was designing the program and designing who we went after in terms of the interview participants, I really wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So we had someone who, you know, is a parent of a child with a disability, and that was really a very important aspect of what we wanted to do, because I wanted to share that side of things as well. So, you know, as I said, we wanted to be as diverse as possible because they all have different perspectives. And I know from my experience, I know what it's like to live with a disability, but it's very much my own. And so my perspectives and my thoughts and opinions are all shaped on my experiences. So everyone has that sort of similarity, but also it's very different. And I wanted to highlight that. And so the intention is to take these recorded interviews that we've done, whittle them down, you know, clean them up, edit them a little bit. And then what we're going to do is create a social media platform and create a social media calendar to be able to share the finalized videos. One thing that was really important to me in the beginning of the process was to make sure that all of the videos had accompanying closed captions that were hand typed by our production crew and our director, and make sure that they were not reliant on third-party software, because sometimes I know that can be a little spotty. So we wanted to make sure that that was part of it. All of our videos are going to be fully inclusive and fully accessible to people with all types of different disabilities, and so that was really important, and that's something that I'm really proud of, that we're in the process of working on through all of our editing time. And so, like I said, we're going to do a rollout to highlight the different speakers that we have, highlight the different perspectives we have, and highlight sort of just create a platform to have them speak about their experiences and interact with people. We want this to be shared. We want this to be able to be copied. I intentionally made this very copyable because I want other cities in Louisiana to look at this project, hopefully, and say, okay, we want to do that, but we want to do that with New Orleans people. We want to do that with Baton Rouge people. We want, I would love for Project Enable to be a sort of umbrella to Project Enable Baton Rouge, Project Enable, Slidell, something like that, to where you get people in these communities that don't often have a voice and don't often have the opportunities to speak about very important issues that they have in their lives, and create that diverse kind of conversation with both people who know what it's like to be disabled and live with that disability, and people who don't. Just as important it is to engage your local disabled community, it's also important to engage people who don't have these challenges and don't know what it's like to live in these circumstances, and sort of the issues and challenges that come along with that. It's always better to show than to tell, in my opinion. I could sit here for 3 hours and say, this is what it's like. This is what my day-to-day routine looks like. But if I instead can say, okay, here's Mary Frances, who is a 19 or 20-year-old college student who's currently, dealing with being a college student, but also dealing with being disabled. And how does that affect her day-to-day life? And how does that affect something as critical and important as being in college? How do those challenges translate? How does it make her perspective different? How does it impact something that's very normal to the majority of the population? Someone like Paul, who was not born disabled, but then had a traumatic brain injury later in life. How did that change? How did that fundamentally alter his day-to-day life and his experiences? And what he's able to do is really great, is to take this terrible accident that happened to him and turn it into an advocacy and informational platform and opportunities. So it's really great to have that it's really great to have that recorded, and really great to have that documented. I learned a lot when we did it in December. We did it over, I think it was about 7 hours for one day in December. And I have been around people with disabilities my entire life. And I've been working directly with them now for 7, 8, 9 years. And I learned so much, not only about myself and my challenges, but also other people and how they interact, because I opened myself up to welcoming in different perspectives that I don't normally get a chance to interact with all at once. Typically, I'll meet with one person for, an hour, 2 hours, whatever, and then I'll go on to the next. So having them all there back to back to back was really great. And then you have someone like Lacey, who is a special needs mom. And so, she did a really fantastic job talking about how she wants the best for her daughter. But she also has to balance that with the needs of her son, who doesn't have a disability. And we want to make sure that, her daughter gets everything she needs, but she wants to make sure as well that her son doesn't feel left out in the process. And that's a very difficult, tightrope to walk. And also, you want to make sure that your kids can do everything, right? But you also have to set that limit and say, okay, here's a list of things they can't do. How do we then deal with that? So in terms of where we are as a project, the recording stage is done. So at this point, I'm going to spend the next couple months going through the videos, figuring out what we need, and then editing the interviews down, making sure, like I said, we have the closed captioning that's embedded, making sure that process works really well. And then our plan is to create a social media calendar, as I said earlier, to really get the idea of this is what we want to do, this is how we want to unveil these different stories and really highlight our interviewers, because once we get to that point, it's all about them. And that's very intentional and very much what I've been wanting from the entire time, is to give these opportunities and give these stories a chance. So it shifts from me to them. And so my role then becomes, okay, how do we get this information out there? So what we're going to be doing is probably highlighting the individual person, and then we'll release their video, and then hopefully they pick up steam. And so it'll be a thing where every month you get, for 8 months out of the year, you get a new interview person and a new perspective and something to look forward to. And so, and again, the idea is to keep that conversation going and keep the momentum that we would hopefully build and spread this to other areas in Louisiana, because, whenever we share these kind of ideas and this perspective, it's you can't, there's no negative to this. There's no negative to deciding that we want to talk about this and talk about something that's different. And, I think that if you have the opportunity to have that in your life, and really learn from something that we don't have, or something you don't know, and even something you do know and you learn it in a different way, that is really powerful stuff. And that's been the goal of Project Enable from the beginning. For me, at least, I was starting from ground zero. I like I said, I'd never written a grant before, so I had to learn what goes into a grant. So I had to really pay attention to what the requirements were to be able to be selected, and make sure that I crossed all my T's and dotted all my I's, and made sure that the information that I wanted was in my head was relayed in a way that made sense to people who, weren't there with me in person, because we were doing this all over Zoom. So it's really difficult to jump into that when you've never done it before, because I was a nervous wreck. I just wanted to kind of make sure that everything was there. But, Janae and Katie really did a really great job with making sure that I had all my answers to all the questions I had, and they were always available to walk me through anything question-wise I had, and obviously it was successful. So that's the best possible scenario for everyone. And I just want to take a few minutes and thank LSU and thank the Reilly Center and everyone involved in the manship school, and say that they have been fantastic. I could not have done this without them. This started as a pipe dream for me, and this was actually my first grant. So this entire project has been an absolute whirlwind, and I learned a lot. Like I said, the only way I could do this was with their amazing help, and they do so much. And thank you guys for allowing me to take the time to talk to you today. Thank you for everyone who contributes to this project, and everyone who is there in person. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I just moved to Florida about a month ago for a career opportunity, so that's why I'm not there with you. I wish I could be there, but again, just thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it. I'm really excited for the next phase of this project, because this has been a ongoing passion project for me for several months now. So I'm ready to unveil it in the near future and really get to that awesome sharing stage. This is where the fun begins. So again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. and go Tigers.
Okay, give us just a couple seconds. We're gonna do a really quick set change and pull our tables up for our next panel. And we will, ahead of that next panel, actually hear a message from Mayor Sharon Weston Broome, who was unable to be here today but really wanted to lend her voice to this very important conversation ahead of today's conversation. So give us maybe like 2 or 3 minutes just to get our mics plugged in and get our panelists seated, and we will be ready to go.
I'm Mia, so it's nice to meet you officially. I've heard all about you. Oh, hello. Up in the front.
Okay, so sorry about that little break. So I want to thank our grantees one more time for their great presentations, all of the amazing work that they've done, as well as Dr. Knobloch for leading the charge in the community collaborative. And as I mentioned,
Hi, everyone.
Mayor Weston Broome has a brief message about her background in media and how it influences her outlook and approach to civic engagement.
When I ran for elected office many years ago, there was an obvious intersection of my communications background with public service. My journalistic background served as an excellent foundation for me as a public servant. Effective communication is needed to get elected, and effective communication is needed to stay elected. For example, I can do great work for the citizens of this community, but if I am not packaging and producing those accomplishments and goals in a way that connect with my constituents, they start believing that all I offered them at the beginning were empty promises. Also, when seeking election, I had to cast a vision of possibilities that connected with the citizens and persuaded them to vote for me. At the end of the day, I believe my background as a journalist has played a major role in how I approach my leadership.
Okay. So we want to say a special thanks to Mayor Broome for sending in that awesome message. She was slated to be on this panel, but travel conflicts arose, so she wasn't able to join us in person. So now I am thrilled to introduce our panel, our feature panel for today, Civic Engagement, the Intersection of Philanthropy and Public Service, which is moderated by Mia Lejeune. Mia is a senior at the LSU Manship School of Mass Communication and Roger Hadfield Ogden Honors College, studying political communication with a minor in history. She is a 2021 Truman Scholar, and her passion is rooted in youth voting, civic engagement, and campaigns and elections. While at LSU, Mia has helped to register over 6,500 students to vote with her organization Go Vote, a nonpartisan student organization dedicated to voter registration and civic engagement. As president, she raised the voter participation rate at LSU by nearly 17% in the 2020 presidential election. With a voting rate of 64.7%, Go Vote and LSU had one of the highest rates in the SEC. Today, Mia is working on her thesis, the study of the history of student activism at LSU. She is a communications assistant for Rep. Royce Duplessis, and she is enjoying her capstone coursework for STAR, Sexual Trauma Abuse Responses Legislative Director. Joining Mia on today's panel are BRAF's Civic Leadership Initiatives Director, Lauren Crapanzano-Jumonville, Louisiana Commissioner of Administration, Jay Darden, and the co-leadership team of Metromorphosis, Raymond Jutson and Sharita Harrison. So if our panelists will join us and sit behind your name tag card, I will hand it over to Mia to get today's conversation started.
Is it on? Sick. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to, this important conversation about civic engagement and philanthropy in our community. We're going to start off with a question for all of our panelists today. We're here to discuss many forms of civic engagement, and which is one of the ways that we can contribute to the common good. Everyone has a role to play in civic engagement, including philanthropists, elected officials, public servants, volunteers, advocates, and others have it through corporate responsibility. Please share how you engage civically and how you see the interplays of all these forms of engagement. We can start with you, Ms. Sharita, excuse me.
No worries, it's a common mistake. So good afternoon, and thank you for bringing up these many roles, right, that people play in civic engagement, because I believe that it brings to light two very important things. And the first one is that it takes all of these roles to make civic engagement happen, right? And so when we think about civic engagement in the traditional sense, it's been limited to kind of just voting and those kinds of things. But if everyone voted and there was no funding to help elected officials, or if there was no funding to get the change to happen, or if there were no volunteers working on the campaigns and those kinds of things. And so I just think it highlights the many roles necessary for civic engagement. And then the second point that I think it brings to light is that when we are engaged in civic engagement ourselves, we often find ourselves playing many different roles, right? And so especially in today's society, very rarely do you occupy just one space, right? You may give to a certain cause or a campaign, but you also may volunteer in other spaces. You may play the role of advocate and bring in awareness for those of us who use social media. And so I think it highlights that we play very different roles. And that's really kind of how I try to see my own civic engagement. Sorry.
I don't know if it's you or me.
That's how I try to see my own civic engagement in these various aspects. And so how can I support the common good? How can I support what I really want to see? And what's the best way to do that? And sometimes that's me bringing awareness and talking to family and friends. But other times that's me pulling out my debit card and going online and making a donation and engaging in that philanthropy. So.
Thank you so much. Mr. Judson?
I think, excuse me, good evening to everyone. I think that a couple of things are critical. One, I think that in the world that we find ourselves in today, the connection between civic engagement and the common good needs to be reestablished. Because I think that unfortunately, there is a propensity in our modern world to engage for a narrowly focused agenda, rather than understanding how I fit in a world that is interrelated. We are all connected, whether we choose to accept it or not, and so there is this interrelatedness, and the roles that I play need to be welcomed in how I show up and how I present myself. And so I think this notion of the common good needs to be the precursor to any conversation about engagement, because otherwise engagement becomes these narrowly defined things that are about advancing an objective that is specific to me and my interest, rather than the betterment of the world that we live in.
I agree, and to add on to that, I think I really like what you said about adding to the public good, because I know Go Vote, while we may be a voter registration organization, have really started encouraging students to advocate for vaccines and to mask up and really be aware of the COVID situation. So it's really not just about, campaigns and elections and getting out the vote. Civic engagement is about bettering your community for a lot of different people.
But Mia, I would add though that an important part of what you were doing is that your effort was about getting students involved in the electoral process. It was not necessarily how do I round up the first 500 people who are going to go vote for what I want them to vote for or who I want them to vote for. It is the value of people understanding that part of the rent that I owe for the air I breathe is making the world better.
Yes, sir. Do you have anything to add, Commissioner Darden?
Well, I think you have to look at engagement at multiple levels. You can be engaged by deciding to run for office. You can be engaged by deciding to support somebody running for office, by encouraging people to vote, and congratulations on all your great efforts, and what you've been able to accomplish. But I think, from my perspective, it all starts with volunteering. I think that's the first word that you got to think about when it comes to engagement, is being willing to give of your most valuable asset, and that is your time, to do something on a volunteer basis. And I've always told people who are interested in running for office that the precursor to running for office ought to be involved in their community and volunteering in some manner or form, be it in a church setting, in a school setting, in a civic association setting, A lot of people have designs on wanting to be public servants, but I think one of the qualifications to get there is to show that you're willing to get your hands dirty and you're willing to be a volunteer and get involved at the grassroots level to make things happen. And so engagement takes many forms, but I think the most fundamental part of being engaged is to recognize that you do it on a volunteer basis, not for yourself, but to help somebody else in some project that is needed in your community.
And Lauren?
I'm lucky enough to work at an organization that really allows me to dream. And I say that, and it sounds a little corny, but I mean it. And I've been blessed to partner with each and every one of my panelists and many of you in the room in some of those efforts. The Baton Rouge Area Foundation is a community foundation, and at our core, what we do is philanthropy. Last year, our donors gave away around $45 million to causes that they cared about and causes that they felt like would benefit the common good. What I get to do is work on real quality of life projects in the Baton Rouge community. These tend to be multi-million, multi-year efforts that somehow move the needle in Baton Rouge and really beyond. And I say this to say, we at the Baton Rouge Area Foundation are most effective when we have strong partners, when we have the community working with us, and when we have a real coalition of organizations and individuals that believe in what we're doing and have brought their perspective to the challenges that we're trying to solve. And so I think I'm lucky to get to do that every day, but that piece of engagement, really working toward that change, is a critical part of community building.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. Now I'd like to get to know you guys a little bit better in your personal journey through civic engagement. I remember the first time I participated in the civic process in my own small way and realized that it mattered. I participated in my elementary school's mock presidential election in 2008, and when they read the results, I was the only student who had voted for Barack Obama. When was your first experience with civic engagement, and how does that experience motivate you today?
I'll start again, because I actually had a similar experience, although not in 2008. And so my school also had a mock presidential election. And I mean, I had watched like my mother and community members show up to, you know, the schools and cast their vote. But it wasn't until I was in the 3rd grade for the presidential election for George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton and Ross Perot, and I went to school in Texas. So this is, you know, it was very interesting to be a student in Texas when Ross Perot was running. And so we had that same mock election. I mean, we had students who represented the candidates, and then they did debates, and we had to research the candidates' platforms, and we had to have conversations with our friends and our families about who they were, that kind of thing. And then we got to go in the voting booth and like press the button. And I remember as a 3rd grader being so excited, as if I really was choosing really was choosing the president. And I don't think I remembered or I recognized it then, but it definitely set like the expectation that I would do this again. And so I was looking forward to engaging in this process. But before I could get there, to Raymond's point, I had to be thoughtful, and I had to show up in other spaces, right? So before I could even understand who I would vote for when I turned 18 or however old I was for the next election that I was eligible for, I had to kind of pay attention in other spaces. So I had to volunteer in spaces, and you know what I mean? I had to research, and I had to become aware of issues that were important to me and my community. But it was definitely that mock election that really put in my mind that this was what I was supposed to be paying attention to and what I was supposed to be doing.
So for me, in a precursor, I guess, of things to come, I actually ran for the student government presidency in the 4th grade at my elementary school, which I later learned that I was not supposed to do until I got to the 6th grade. But I ran in the 4th grade and won, and it set a course where from 4th grade to my sophomore year in college, I was my class president and the student body president at the school that I was in, other than than college. And so that was the start of it for me. I will never forget that my campaign platform had something to do with the number of days that we had access to donuts at the school. In my elementary school, the cafeteria staff actually did homemade donuts 2 days a week, and mine was to take that to 3 days a week.
It's an important point. I think we should all run on that.
And I have no doubt that it had something to do with my being victorious.
Commissioner Darden?
Well, Raymond, our stories are going to be somewhat similar. And you're taking me back quite a while, though. But I was president of my kindergarten class.
Oh, wow.
But it was by fiat, not by election. The way I remember it, although some of my good friends who were in the same class say baloney that they could do this too, but the way I remember it, I was designated the president because I could tell time, and nobody else could tell time. And some of my classmates have now disputed that, but anyway, I remember that. It didn't necessarily involve civic engagement, but Raymond talking about his experience reminded me of that. And the reward was that in the class picture, I was seated on the front row next to all the girls in the class. So that was very memorable. But like Raymond, I ran for president of my student council at elementary school, but I want to harken back to something Sharon talked about, because I think my introduction to effective communication took place even then, because my late younger brother was also in the school, and he was a very talented mimic at the time as a fourth grader, and I had him introduce me for my campaign speech as various characters of the day, like Alfred Hitchcock and some other characters, and I think that's clearly why I won the election, but it was a lesson in the importance of communication. So my civic engagement from a standpoint of running for office goes back even to then, but I'll also mention what I said earlier. I also thought it very important during my elementary school days, really my high school days, to get involved in activities and to let people know you were willing to volunteer and do some things that were benefiting others more than they may have been benefiting you.
Lauren?
Me and Sharita, I resonated with your stories. It was the Bush-Kerry election for me. And in my case, Kerry got 3 votes. And so it was a real awakening for me in that I was young enough to not quite understand, but old enough to understand I needed to. And so I distinctly remember going home that night and asking my parents who Bush and Kerry were and why there was such a landslide victory. Turns out my parents had split the vote too, and so it was a great conversation, understanding the differences. But I think engagement has to start with that understanding that if you don't know what you're engaging around and why you're pulling the lever one way or another, then why pull the lever at all? And that was an important point for me as a young kid, and then as I continued to engage getting older.
I think it's so important that all of our panelists here today, all had an experience with a mock presidential election or running for student office, and I think at a young age, I think it just reminds us all how important it is to educate children from a young age, the importance of civic engagement, the importance of getting involved in the political process, and though that's not the conversation we're having here today, early childhood education is a, great thing. So, next question. For many, civic engagement equates to participating in the democratic process by voting and mobilizing others to vote, while others see this as part of contributing to the common good. How are these concepts intertwined? So how are the concepts of voting, benefiting the public good versus voting to mobilize a candidate to win? How are those two intertwined?
So I will start on this one. I believe that it is critical for us as a people to understand that the election only positions folks to serve. So very often we think that because I have voted for somebody and that person one, that my efforts are done, that it's finished. The accountability, I can't remember, Mayor Broome talked about, this communication in getting elected, but also staying elected. I think part of the most valuable civic engagement that we can have is after people are elected, to make certain that the things that they talked about when they were running for office are actually the things that they are working to make happen, and to make certain that the systems and the environments that they are in are important. We put a lot of effort in getting people to go vote, and then there is this huge drop-off in activity. I think that there needs to be a very concerted effort to help all of us understand that our voice matters and that our engagement is very likely most important after people have been elected. And I did want to just touch on your previous comment about the importance of people being engaged. I think we should all be concerned at the decline of the teaching of civics in schools, and people's really lack of awareness of what it is that I'm supposed to be engaged in and why it matters to me and my community.
Yeah, and Raymond, and so I think of civic engagement as this maybe continuum, right? And so certainly the election kind of being right in the middle, and then what happens after the election is certainly important. But I often talk about the need for informed voting. So, right, Lauren, like what this, and I often tell people that your informed vote matters, right? And so I think there is something for mobilizing people to vote, and just raising that awareness that this is something that you should do. Certainly, third grade me was very excited to vote without a lot of awareness about what I was voting for. And so there is something for that. But there is a whole other piece of this that happens leading up to the election. Sorry, my voice shocked me. There's another piece of this leading up to elections that is about being engaged in your communities and engaged in and aware, so that you can be informed, so that your vote actually matters. And so when I think about just the democratic process, I agree. We spend a lot of time getting people to participate in an election, when there should be that engagement leading up to people, helping people to be aware of what the issues are and how they're interconnected. I mean, an example of this is that we push the census, and for a lot of people, the census is just a tally, right? A lot of people have no idea how many resources and how things are structured, how much of that is connected to what happens to the census, right? And so being able to engage people before that and educate people on that other end, I think is way more critical than just kind of mobilizing or engaging people around a candidate.
Commissioner Darden, do you have anything to add?
Well, the way the question is posed raises a bunch of different levels of responses. It suggests that by mobilizing or voting, we're going to do something for the common good. And I'm not sure the common good is what motivates people today when they go to the polls and vote. And that's a little unfortunate, because people are so polarized and people are so strident in their views that a lot of times the common good gets lost in the desire to make sure my team wins. And then we see that play out in the kind of gridlock that we have to some extent in Louisiana, to a much larger extent in Washington. And so I'm not sure the common good is what everybody is always searching for when they try and encourage people to participate in the process. There's been a lot of discussion over the life of our democracy. And Winston Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government, except all other forms of government, and so it's a democratic process, and so the majority prevails in our elections. But the way we have evolved in elections often involves not so much mobilizing people as it is suppressing people from voting. And so you've got to deal with the tension between encouraging your guys to vote and potentially not having people vote because it may be adverse to your position. I was the Secretary of State for 4 years, and I was in charge of elections in Louisiana at a time when there was a lot of discussion about the elections, not to the extent that we have now and that it's become such a cause celeb, but I spent a lot of time trying to do what I could do to make sure people voted and had the opportunity to vote at every level. We increased early voting quite a bit when I was Secretary of State because the legislature agreed that that was something we needed to make it easier for people to be able to vote when it was convenient for them and not necessarily on a single day. And one of my biggest frustrations, and I used to be able to say this a lot when I was a young man, but I'm not a young man anymore, but what used to frustrate me and did when I was Secretary of State was the lack of involvement by young people. The 18 to 24-year-old vote, and Mia, you know this, you spent your career here trying to change that. The 18 to 24-year-old vote across the country is ridiculously low compared to other demographic groups, and the power would rest with young people if they seize the opportunity to get involved in the process and to vote. And traditionally, and this is going back to my time in the 1970s, a very activist time for young people in the late 60s and into the 70s. That was when young people were engaged. They were loud, they were involved, they were driving decisions that were being made. But even then, there was not the turnout when it came time to vote that you would have expected. I remember I was president of the student body here at LSU, and the year I was president, Vanderbilt University had a student body election and nobody ran for president. I remember that vividly because they didn't have a president because nobody ran, nobody wanted to run. And that was just kind of indicative of the kind of the mindset at the time, and it's continued to some extent. So I'm kind of rambling on, but the point is the engagement has to be something that motivates people to get involved. And you caught lightning in a bottle when you were able to register, and I hope they voted, the number of people who were willing to sign up to vote and hopefully actually participated in the process.
Mia, can I jump in because I really want to lift up something that's inherent in Jay's comments. A couple of things. One is common good in our current environment. It is almost an oxymoron because people are motivated by my definition of good. Good is what advances me and my interest. And part of the tragedy of this moment in our country is we probably have more people engaged in political and campaigns and government-related efforts than at any point in our history. But we are working at polar opposites. And imagine what America would be if we were actually able to search for a common good. And if we were able and willing to focus on what was good for us and not just my particular slice of this country. And the tragedy of the moment for me is that at a time when engagement and activism and political activism is at a high, the notion of altruism and a shared living experience is at an all-time low. And I believe that history will be unkind to us for what we are leaving for the next generation.
Very, very interesting point. For time's sake, we'll move on to the next question, which is focused for Ms. Sharita and Mr. Jetson. In many ways, the pandemic changed how we have historically organized, mobilized, and engaged. Despite this, we saw a record number of voters turn out in the 2020 election here at LSU. We saw a 17% increase in voters at the poll. What role did volunteers and grassroots organizing play in that turnout? And are there examples, what are the examples of this here in Louisiana and in Baton Rouge specifically?
So, we have a lot of examples of grassroots organizing really driving campaigns, driving elections, driving movements, right? It's not really new. I mean, I think every significant change that we've experienced in our country it hasn't necessarily been from the top down, right? It's been because people have demanded as such. It's been because people have been driving that. And I think the 2020 election was no different, right? And so you see what happened in Georgia as Stacey Abrams, did that work, the grassroots work in organizing and what happened here. But I think you see it here in Louisiana too. Of course, we have the Power Coalition with Miss Ashley Shelton, who is doing a lot of that work, right? So engaging people in communities to just have conversations from door to door to make sure people are even aware that there is an election and that they can, and the ways that they can go out and make their voices heard. And then an element of that is helping people understand ways in which their voice is quieted, right? And so to the point of voter suppression and those types of things, I think you see that the grassroots movements address both of those, right? And so we see that here. We also saw it in the work of Vote that worked to get the formerly incarcerated persons, right, back the right to vote. And so again, these are these grassroots movements that are really driving campaigns. And so I remember talking to someone, a formerly incarcerated person at a Vote meeting who was 60, 70 years old, and it was his first election. And he was very excited about, Go Vote the app and that kind of thing, because he hadn't seen it. And he cast his vote. But what he said after was actually more important. He said, and now I'm telling everybody, right? And so this is not coming from the people on the TV. This is not coming from, newscasters. This is coming from friends, people that right, knocking on your door, that kind of thing. And so I think that grassroots organizing is critical. It was critical in 2020, and it's going to be critical as we move forward.
And the grassroots organizing is as critical as Sharita referenced. I think the biggest change in grassroots organizing and mobilizing people to participate in elections, particularly from back in the Stone Age when I ran for elective office, is the advance of technology and the use of social media in mobilizing and activating people. I mean, there is an app now where you can tap on the app and call 5 members of Congress office and communicate. There are emails or social media posts that can be shared with a link in it where you can click on the link and automatically send an email to a dozen legislators or other folks. And so I think that the advance and the change in technology in mobilizing people is around technology and will be in increasing measure.
Do you think there are any shortfalls to relying so heavily on technology and the social media connection versus the face-to-face?
I think there are risks, yes, but I think it's important that you meet people where they are and understand what influences them and what motivates them.
Yeah.
I mean, when I ran for office, I had people working a phone bank, and we had paper lists that we were working with, and we literally, would highlight strong names and draw lines through negative names, and we would create a list for election day. The last time I worked in a campaign, people, hit a couple of keys and cut the list of favorable votes. I mean, it was all generated in an automated way. We did a nonpartisan participated in a nonpartisan get out the vote effort, and the people came to our office and basically set up computers and gave us headphones, and the computer just would auto dial people, and we'd have conversations with them. But just the impact of technology in mobilizing people. I don't think it will ever replace saying to somebody, here's who I am, here's what I believe, here's what I stand for, and I would like for you to vote for me. I think that's what matters most, but I think technology will be a major driver in mobilizing people now and going forward.
And I'm sorry, can I just respond? Because I think it's important to note that anytime you rely on any one thing, there are risks, right? And so talking again about voter suppression, even from a technology versus a face-to-face, if both of those didn't happen, you would miss a sector of the population. And so Mr. J talked about the young vote, right? Where are young people, and what is the way, how do you engage young people? And so I think when you talk about relying on any one method of engagement, you are inherently going to leave out a sector of the population, and that's the real risk, right? That's the real danger, is that you are now not including people who just by nature of their birth deserve to be heard, right? And so I think that's the real risk.
No, that's an excellent point. There's a lot of different strategies that need to come into play to successfully reach the most voters we can.
Mia, let me jump in. I know you want to move along to the next question, but let me jump in and say this. There's no question technology has changed everything, and Raymond and I have seen it from a standpoint of being candidates and running for office, but since the theme here is about civic engagement, that really speaks to citizens attempting to influence public policy by communicating with people who make decisions. Mm-hmm. And I have repeatedly told people, and even in this day of changed communication, there is no substitute for personal contact. And as a legislator, a former legislator, you want to hear from people directly. That means a lot more than getting a mass email that you know came from somebody who pushed a button because somebody told them to send this to everybody. And I think that the way to most influence and get engaged is to develop a personal relationship with an elected official or communicate with them directly as opposed to just over an email or a text.
Good point. Lauren, the next question is for you and Commissioner Darden, but I'll start with you. Philanthropic dollars are critical within communities for responding to crises and reaching communal goals. What does successful utilization of private funds for the common good look like? And what could be some of the drawbacks?
One of the things we talk about a lot in my work is this idea of a three-legged stool, that in order to really implement change in a community, you have to have all three legs of the stool working together. We talk about those legs as the government, public, both city, local, and state, sometimes federal. You have to have the business community with you and supporting that effort, and you have to have philanthropy. But the most important part of that stool is what it's made out of, and it's made out of the community voices and perspectives that are in your community and really driving that change. If any one of those components is missing, then your philanthropic dollars are ineffective, because really trying to move that needle with all of those entities, those stakeholders, going in the same direction toward that common goal is critical. And I think to the conversation we've been having around the divisiveness in our country and in our communities nowadays, I'm often called a little bit of a naive optimist, and I'll wear that badge with honor. I believe that people really want the same end goals. Everybody wants this idea of a quality life, and we want it for everyone in our community too. It's how we get to that goal that's what really where we differ, and I think we agree more often than we don't. So I like to think that philanthropy can play a real role in helping to move things along quicker, that sometimes government can get bogged down, no offense, in some of the the bureaucratic processes that we have in place, which are there for a reason and are important too. And so I think where philanthropy can move quickly and can move with a community of perspectives behind it is when it's most effective.
Commissioner Darden, do you have anything to add?
Only that what you're seeing evolve these days in decision making are a lot more public-private partnerships than we've had in the past, where government recognizes it needs the private sector to make things move quicker to avoid the very bureaucracy that you're talking about. And that's been a hard time in coming for I think, government to evolve into recognizing that it doesn't have all the answers, and it's much better when it relies on the private sector to provide assistance and recognizes the benefit of philanthropic dollars that can also be partners in trying to make certain good things happen.
Do you guys have anything to add?
I wholeheartedly agree.
Guess we'll move on to the next question then. So this is an interesting one, I think. Too often, a lot of grassroots organizers say that funding and donations who are organizing to mobilize civic engagement often come in as a response to a crisis. In Louisiana, these crises are often caused by natural disasters, which highlight and exacerbate pre-existing issues such as housing shortages and food insecurity. Disaster also highlight the preparedness and the ability of communities to respond. How can philanthropic dollars best be used to mitigate those pre-existing issues and support preparation in a sustainable way?
I think one of the things we've seen at the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, again, in my time there, and I'll harken a little bit back to what I said in my previous answer, philanthropy can move fast. After Hurricane Katrina, we raised some $40 million plus for the state of Louisiana, and that was for really two main goals that you're hitting on in your question, Mia. The first is that there's that immediate search, rescue, relief effort that has to happen, and philanthropy can really step in quickly to do that. But I think the important part of your question is that long-term recovery piece. How do we build back better? How do we ensure that the next time a disaster hits, we're more prepared? And at the foundation, we've spent a lot of our money and maybe more importantly, a lot of our time and resources and experts trying to think about that in a way that can really change what a disaster looks like. The truth is we don't know what the next disaster is going to be. COVID is the greatest example of that. We talk about COVID as a disaster in our organization because it really added this new heightened sense of isolation and really exacerbated a lot of the inequities that exist in our community. And so where we all operate best is not in our silos, but working together. We have to have philanthropy and the public sector, the community at large, the business community, not to repeat myself again, but really all looking at these challenges and responding in the best ways that they can, so that along that continuum we're solving these problems.
Go ahead, Julie.
I was just going to say, so I'll jump in, and I agree with everything, Lauren, that you just said, that I think that you have to have this kind of cross-sector group of people that are developing this response, right? One of the things, though, that I think I might lift up is the idea of a response, right? And so while I agree we don't know what the next disaster will be, we can probably anticipate that there will be a next one, right? I mean, we have them seeming pretty regularly here, right? From a flood to a winter storm, like here in South Louisiana, right? And so I think we can anticipate that there will be disasters to come. And we also know where and who might be most affected by these disasters, right? There are communities, and you mentioned kind of these pre-existing issues. There are communities that are more vulnerable, right, to disasters. A few years ago, I attended a conference, and it was about nonprofit management, and a recurring theme through that conference was climate change. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't do climate change. And what they said is climate change, whether you believe it or not, if and when it happens, guess who's going to be most affected by it, right? Communities that typically use social services, right? And so I would like to see, our philanthropic efforts, not just in response to crises and disasters, but also in keeping those from disproportionately impacting communities that are vulnerable to them. And that's not to say that doesn't happen. I think here we have a really good philanthropic community. I'm not just saying that, Lauren, because you're sitting on this panel. I believe it. I think that the people in foundations and individuals really do a really good job of trying to help vulnerable populations and vulnerable communities. But I think if we really want to see our response dollars go further, we really have to start front loading that and thinking about those communities that are going to be most vulnerable to these disasters.
So, Mia, I am going to use a phrase that you will very likely have no clue about its context, but your grandparents will probably know clearly. And it is pay me now or pay me later. There was a commercial of my childhood of Fram oil filters. And Fram oil filters' message was that you can either pay for an oil filter or you can pay for an engine. I think our response to disasters is we keep buying engines over and over again rather than identifying where can we strategically pay for some oil filters to keep the thing from getting as gummed up as it does in the aftermath of a disaster. I think we need to do a bit better at intelligence gathering to understand who's on the ground in communities, who really has connections with community, who has the ability to connect with people, and how do we build up their capacity to be ready to respond when we face the inevitable disaster.
Sure. Commissioner Darden?
Well, I think maybe a little bit of the contrary to what Raymond just said. We probably are the nation's experts on disasters. I mean, we're the experts. This is where disasters have hit. One of the first and I think most significant lessons post-Katrina was while the various government entities were pointing the finger at each other as to who was screwing up more or who was responsible, the faith community and the volunteer community was who was stepping up and making things happen right away. And that's a lesson that's continued, I think, as we've responded to disasters over the course of the past 20 years since Katrina, and it involves appropriate preparation and planning and funding that's in place based on lessons learned from all the past tragedies that we faced, as well as the inherent response of the American people when they see bad things happening to other people. I think we all know people tend to respond when there's a plea for help, and we see it in disasters. We see it when individual people are adversely affected. We certainly see it nowadays with the whole advent of GoFundMe and these kind of activities that are underway in the way we communicate now. I mean, decades ago, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to have people respond from all over the country in a way in which they do now. So I think it's an appropriate balance between appropriate preparation and funding, as well as counting on people to respond when people are in need.
And I'm going to kind of ad-lib a little here, but something Ms. Sharita said, bringing up climate change and something you were saying about people acting in response to help, it kind of got me thinking, how can we use the conversation around our coast and communications around our coast to let people know that the cry for help doesn't have to happen when a hurricane hits or a freak ice storm hits? How do we use communications and that story, that narrative that we are drowning now, we do need help now? How do we spread that message to the rest of the country?
It's a very difficult challenge. There was an organization that was established probably more than a decade ago to call attention to America's wetland, because this is not just Louisiana's coast, it's America's wetland that impacts the ability to provide heating and cooling oil to the rest of the country, to provide people with the seafood that they want and demand from Louisiana, to be able to utilize the ports that are impacted negatively by the decline of the coast. But still, when it's not something happening immediately, it's hard to get people to recognize that. That is a big challenge, though, because I always like to say it's as important to people in Chicago and Sheboygan as it is to Chauvin and Shack Bay, because what happens to the Louisiana coast impacts what happens to America's ability to take advantage of the assets that we sometimes take for granted. And it's a big challenge. You're right, trying to make certain people realize that now.
Thank you. So this is kind of a question for everyone. Some criticize the purpose for which philanthropic dollars are deployed within communities. This criticism can come from many reasons, but one of those is the belief that projects often reflect a privilege within a community and especially benefit those with white privilege. How can you see these decisions regarding philanthropic dollars being more inclusive?
So I think I'd offer, in my response to this, maybe a moment of self-reflection. The Baton Rouge Area Foundation was a recipient of a grant from the John D. and Catherine D. MacArthur Foundation a few years ago, and we've continued that relationship since then. The MacArthur Foundation set as a goal trying to get communities around the country to safely lower their jail populations, recognizing that in many communities, Louisiana in particular, we have over-incarcerated for a long time. And we signed on to that commitment, and it really became a civic leadership effort where we brought together our criminal justice partners and community stakeholders trying to identify the challenges in our jail population. I'm extremely proud to say that we have lowered our jail population by 43% since we started that effort some 3 or 4 years ago. But I say all of this as background that I think one of the roles in philanthropy is acknowledging that really important success, but also asking really tough questions about what underlies those numbers. And Dr. Knobloch, I'm going to harken back to your presentation for those of you who were here earlier, this idea of skill building, that I think philanthropy may need to take a look at itself and its own role in skill building. The MacArthur Foundation has really been pushing us, in particular the last couple of years, to look at that 43% decrease and who makes it up. Is it majority white inmates who are now not ending up in jail and we're still over-incarcerating our black population? Has it been a proportionate drop across racial efforts? And I think there are clearly a lot of things you can put in place to bring these questions, these challenges to light. Ideally at the beginning of a project and not as you're moving along the way. One of the most critical things is who's sitting around the table. I know as a woman and as a mother that I tend to bring that perspective to every effort that I work on. And we have to have people who are really representative of the communities that we're trying to help, having a voice in all of our philanthropic efforts, or else we're not going to think about things in the ways and perspectives that those communities are impacted. I think the other thing that I have always found really powerful, I'm clearly a data person, but is data, that, there's that old adage, lies, damn lies, and statistics. But I think that it's also really important to look at the data and to ask those tough questions that, yes, I'm proud of that 43% number, but what makes up the 43% number, and how do we move the needle in a way that brings all of those perspectives and moves it in a proportional way across the spectrum?
I am thinking about something that I remember from my childhood, and it was this conversation around spending money, right? And I remember one of the cousins or someone, I don't remember exactly who it was, asking why don't they get to decide what food, what meals are prepared? And the response was, because you don't pay for it. You don't make the money. And so I get to decide how it's spent, right? And so if you want inclusivity in how the dollars are spent, you have to have inclusivity in who is spending the dollars. And so one of the ways that philanthropy as a whole can be more inclusive is to have people not just around the table, but at the head of the table, right? And so how do we begin to reflect our community as a whole in not just philanthropy, every sector, but since you asked me about philanthropy, how does philanthropy begin to reflect our community as a whole in 2022 and not maybe what our community looked like 30 years ago?
Thank you. Mr. Judson?
I think that part of the challenge of the construct of much of philanthropy is that it's already determined what outcomes it values and it wants to see happen. The shift that I believe is absolutely necessary if we're going to truly have philanthropy, and I do, not like Sharita, I think we do a very good job here in Baton Rouge in many instances, is investing in people who are part of their communities and who have relationships with other people, and trust them to do what's in the best interest of their communities. One of the things that Sharita and I talk about frequently in conversations with donors quite often at Metromorphosis is this concept of emergence. And it is that the work that really needs to be done will emerge as you do the work you think needs to be done. And so what I start doing and telling you that I'm doing at the beginning, as I do that, I may actually discover that that's not what really needs to be done. And typically, philanthropy does not allow the flexibility for you to actually do the work that needs to be done. And I can share with you from experience that there is nothing more frustrating than doing something because it's required by a funder, but knowing in your heart that it's not what really needs to be done to make a difference in the lives of people in a community.
Commissioner Darden, do you have anything to add?
I agree with what each of the other panelists have said. You've got to have people sitting around the table who are engaged and are open-minded, and then you've got to be able to use philanthropic dollars to be able to create opportunities for people to improve their own lot in life.
Thank you. So for our final question, we're here at Louisiana's flagship university, LSU, and ever since I arrived here in 2018, my peers and I are constantly and consistently asked, what can make you stay in Louisiana? How do you think civic engagement plays into this question? And is civic engagement and all the concepts we talked about here a key part of making a place feel like home?
I'll start again. So, Mia, another similarity, when I arrived on this campus in 2002, people asked me, what made you come here? And then when I finished, people said, why are you still here? Mostly people not from here. I love Baton Rouge. And when it comes to what can make me stay in Baton Rouge, it's probably the thing that has made me stay for the last 20 or so years. It's the people. So Baton Rouge has this lovely mix of challenges that need to be addressed, but also the opportunity to address them with the people in mind, right? And so very rarely do often I run into people who have thoughts about how to make their communities, their neighborhoods, this city better. They are interested in being involved, and they understand how some people may not be involved, right? And so the people are my favorite part of this city. And when I think about this from a civic engagement piece, I think that ultimately what needs to happen is more people need to realize the power that they possess, right, in this democratic process, in this community change process, in this civic engagement sphere. More people need to realize that power, and more people need to stop trying to convince people that they don't have the power. And so that's what will make me stay. Although I'm pretty committed by now, but I mean,
she's dedicated.
I'm pretty committed by now. But.
I think it's important to disabuse young people of the notion that my current circumstances are my permanent circumstances, that the current state of affairs in this community are the permanent state of affairs. and that they actually have the capacity, they have the agency, they can build the wherewithal to be a part of creating the world that they want to live in. The community that values them, that values their gifts, talents, and abilities, that actually nurtures their aspirations, and wants them to live a good life. But it is instilling that belief that things can be different, that they can be better, and that they can be better in a way that values me as a human being and my hopes, dreams, and aspirations.
Commissioner Darden?
Contrary to the notion of the brain drain that we've heard so much about over the course of the past decade, where young people get educated here and can't wait to leave or go somewhere else, Louisiana, interestingly enough, along with Pennsylvania, have been the two states where more people who were born here actually stay here and don't want to go anywhere else. And I think that's a product of our culture and the fact that we love our state, we love who we are, we love the diversity of Louisiana, but anytime you talk about what will make you stay in Louisiana, the one word is jobs, is the ability to create jobs that attract young people and that mesh with the skill set that they've gained as a result of going to school here, going to LSU, going to Southern, going somewhere else in Louisiana. And that becomes the real challenge of government and of business working together to make sure that we're training people with the right skills for jobs that exist here or can exist here, and then making those opportunities available so people don't have to go somewhere else to ply their trade. Unfortunately, we have been a state of lost opportunities over the course of my whole lifetime. There's no reason why a college town like Baton Rouge is not Austin in the way Austin has grown. There's no reason why New Orleans is not Atlanta or Birmingham, becoming centers of excellence for medicine or for business. And we've lost that opportunity, but you can't look at what's happened in the past. We got to worry about what we're going to do from this point forward to try and change that dynamic. And that is a challenge for all of us in the public sector, in the private sector, in those who are seeking to be engaged civically, and those who we're trying to motivate to be engaged civically. We've all got to come together, I think, and recognize that's the big challenge that we face in trying to make certain that the next generation of Louisianians want to be Louisianians.
I left Louisiana for college with no intention of ever coming back. I guess, spoiler alert, I'm here. And I left for all the reasons you hope your young people don't leave, that I felt like I had lived in a bubble of closed-mindedness, and I wanted to get out and see the world and leave my mark. Again, that naive optimism. And it was my naive optimism that brought me back. And I came back for all the reasons you want your young people to come back. A love of our culture and our people, but maybe more importantly, a belief that I could make an influence here. And I say all of this personal anecdote to say that I think to your point about how we increase opportunity in Baton Rouge, in Louisiana, we have to grow the sphere of influence of who in Louisiana can really move that needle. And I think we're making a lot of strides in that direction, and I'm excited to see that momentum happening because our young people have a lot to offer and share with our community.
Does the audience have any questions?
This is something actually Janae and I were talking about earlier. Often when you're dealing with funders, they want to fund what's new and what's exciting. How do you encourage funders or others in the field to focus on those kind of like long-term sustainable needs that aren't necessarily new and exciting, but we know are going to make a big difference to our communities?
I think it's important to cultivate relationships and people who are investing in the big picture, what it is you're really trying to do. And part of the challenge is that often donors are willing to write a check for a specific thing, and we will check in later, to see if we will continue. I have always shared with prospective donors that I would rather you write a check for less money, but write them over time than to write one big check, because I'm not interested in just money. It is the partnership and the relationship, and I think that that's what's really important, being able to talk to people over the course of time where you can acknowledge, how the shiny bobbly thing is really pretty and shiny and bobbly, but this thing over here is what will really make a difference in the lives of people. And over time and in relationship, people will either learn to trust and go with your judgment, or they will move on and find somebody who's willing to accept their money to do the shiny bobbly thing, and I'm okay with that too.
And I'll add, just echoing that, at Metromorphosis, we tend to think about partnership, right? And so we're not just looking for people to fund the work, we're looking for partners in the change, in the vision that we're trying to create. And so the majority of my background is in nonprofit management. Started when I was 18 years old teaching adults to read. And so I've collected like this information. And one of the things that I think between the what you're speaking about, people who have been successful in like getting people to think about the big picture versus just the new shiny thing is that partnership, right? And then the organization not treating the relationship as transactional, right? And so a lot of times people submit a proposal and it's like, I want your money. I want you to do this. And we have to remember that grant makers, philanthropic people are people, right? They're not ATM machines. And so I think one of the ways, so from the other side, as the nonprofit or the person seeking the funding, we can remember to be less transactional when we're talking about getting funding.
I think we ask our nonprofit change makers, if you will, to do a lot, to wear a lot of hats. They have to be fundraisers. They have to be experts in whatever social services or community organizing that they're doing in the community. They have to be relationship builders across their clients and individuals they're working with potential funders and with partners and stakeholders in the community that are going to work with them. And they also better keep good records and be able to analyze their data and tell us in a compelling way what it is they're doing and how they're moving the needle. And I think I say this to say we're asking a lot of them and maybe too much. That we heard earlier about Dee Dee Reilly and her belief in the leadership at Planned Parenthood and this idea of believing in these long-term goals and visions and relationships. I think it's really important that we have those conversations, and it's starting to happen in the philanthropic field. You're seeing it at a national level, particularly now with Melinda Gates and Mackenzie Scott coming in with really large gifts with fewer strings attached to them. And I think you're going to start seeing that at a more local level as well. But it's really trying to educate funders about what their restricted gift is really asking of the nonprofit they're purporting to help.
Oh, Lauren, you were speaking to me. I serve as the executive director for the Gardere Initiative. We've been in existence for 15 years, and right now we're looking at sustainability. Probably the number one problem in the East Baton Rouge Parish area is violence. We started because of the violence in the Gardere community after Katrina. In 2008, there were 7 murders in that 3.3 square mile area. And the churches came together and said, we need to do something. What the city did was put a substation there, but we said we need to do something to empower the people. And we have done that. So right now, you don't hear about the violence in Gardere, you know? And so sometimes we wonder, like the sheriff's office, because we work very closely with law enforcement, we work very closely with the mayor's office, and we're saying, okay, we need to stay here because we have actually accomplished our goal of reducing the crime in that area, and it's a struggle because of all the things that you said that funders require of folks like us. Thank you.
Absolutely. And let me just say, y'all have done incredible work. It's been wonderful to watch and hear the stories of the transformation in your neighborhood. Thank you.
What advice would you offer to first-time civic leaders or even Louisiana transplants like myself and a lot of other out-of-state students?
Get to know as many Louisianians as you possibly can, and you'll never want to leave.
I was gonna say, get involved, right? Get engaged, and I don't restrict that to how you get engaged, right? But connect to local work. There are a lot of passionate people, a lot of great organizations. You just heard one of them, right? And so get involved and connect to something locally, because what you'll see is how all of the issues are interrelated. They're all connected, and all of them go back to policy. And so you'll find kind of your passion point and have these real life stories to connect to it. So as a fellow transplant, get connected, get involved, and it'll become clear how you deploy yourself civically.
And I think this is an appropriate moment to thank our Manship School and the Reilly Center, because as a student, I can say that they really encourage us to take a step outside the brick and ivy and to really get engaged with our local community and find an issue that impassions us. So it's really incredible to have a space that lets us have conversations like these and get involved outside of our university to, you know, cultivate young leaders like Lizzie. So yeah. Did you have anything to add? Do you guys have any last final closing statements? Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. It is incredible to have you all here. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you, all of our panelists. You know, one of the questions that came up, or rather one of the comments that came up, was about, you know, what does the common good, what does contributing to the common good really mean? And this entire program really developed from that question. We were talking about this after Dee Dee Reilly passed, but we were also looking at a really divided populace over what we should be doing around a pandemic, and these questions of what do we, what are our individual rights, what do we owe to our fellow citizens when it comes to, a pandemic. And we saw that the questions that came up are the same ones that came up in 1918. And so, human nature is going to be the same, and there's always going to be some self-interest there, but, how is it that we're defining the common good? And so there's so many ways that we contribute to each other and to an environment that benefits all of us. And so that's why we wanted to talk about civic engagement in terms of philanthropy, in terms of volunteerism, public service, elected office. So I'm glad that our panelists keyed in on that. So now I'm glad we have some extra time because I get to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Roger Ogden, and what he does in our community and in Louisiana is incredibly impressive, and it might take me some time to get through this, but Roger Ogden has his hands in so many different parts of our communities. And so, you know, one of the things that I share with him and that Jay Darden, who just ran out of here, is that we all served as LSU student body presidents. So I've always been excited to talk to Roger and hear what he is up to. And I'm usually surprised because there's so many things. And we all really benefit from his philanthropy as well as his ability to see kind of from a very high level who to bring together and who should be having conversations. And it's not just about the dollars that he may contribute individually. So let me tell you a little bit about him. He is a New Orleans real estate developer, philanthropist, and civic leader, as I mentioned. He contributes to many economic development organizations serving New Orleans and Louisiana. Currently serving on the New Orleans Aviation Board. He's helped lead the design and construction of a new $1 billion terminal building for Louis Armstrong International Airport. Ogden was the founding chairman of the SOLA Super Region Committee, which is a collaboration between GNO Inc. and the Baton Rouge Area Chamber that unites the entire Southeast Louisiana region for economic development initiatives. For a grand vision for a premier showcase of Southern art, and if you guys have not been to this museum, you must go. Ogden donated over 1,000 pieces from his personal art collection for the initial holdings of the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. Goldring Hall was the first phase of the Ogden Museum, and it opened in August of 2003. The museum has led to a renaissance of this historically important area of New Orleans and is nationally recognized as the largest and most comprehensive collection of Southern art. Ogden is on the board of trustees of the Ogden Museum and remains an active collector of Southern art. In addition, he has served on the board of directors of the Contemporary Art Center, which is across the street, the New Orleans Museum of Art, the New Orleans Ballet, the Louisiana State Museum, the LSU Museum of Art, the New Orleans Center for the Creative Arts, or NOCA, and the Louisiana Governor's Mansion Foundation. In 2014, Mr. Ogden funded the endowment of the LSU Roger Hadfield Honors College to honor his father and son, to keep and attract the very best and the brightest in Louisiana and at LSU. With approximately 2,000 students, the Ogden Honors College is also a residential college, and it's located at the heart of LSU's historic campus. Originally, the Ogden Leaders Program the Ogden Leaders Program annually recognizes up to 5 outstanding honors undergraduates with grants awarded for a self-directed program of study, research, or humanitarian effort. Mr. Ogden has been active in many civic organizations, including past chairman of the LSU Board of Supervisors, past chairman of the Audubon Park Commission, and the chairman of the boards of many other public and nonprofit organizations, including the International House of Blues Foundation Board and the LSU Stanley S. Scott Cancer Center Board of Advisors, and co-chairman of the LSU Tulane Cancer Consortium Board of Advisors. He's currently a member of the LSU Foundation Board and the executive committee of the LSU Flagship Coalition, a group of statewide leaders supporting LSU's flagship agenda and excellence. In connection with his civic work, he has donated his time and talents as the coordinating developer of the Audubon Aquarium of the Americas and Waldenburg Park, a world-renowned $100 million riverfront park, and the $30 million restoration of the historic Louisiana Supreme Court building located in the heart of New Orleans French Quarter. He chaired the design and construction committee for the development of the new $60 million E.J. Orso Business School complex at LSU. So that's the end of the things that he has in here, and I know that there are many, many more. But as I said, Roger Ogden has his hands in so many things that we do here in the state, and he's here to talk to us about how he sees civic engagement, as well as how he got involved and became so committed to our communities. You ready?
So Janae, I'm sorry Jay had to leave. I'm not going to stand back there.
Okay.
We're a small group, so.
Is it on?
I think I am. Can you hear me? So I started to say when Jay was still here that the Vanderbilt campus is obviously wiser than we are. There were no suckers to run rather than student body like you and Janae, you and Jay and me. And I'll tell you a quick story about that. I don't think I've told you this before. So when I ran for student body president, it was in the 60s, and the world was a lot different. And so I had grown up in Lafayette, and I came. You've heard a little of this, and I came to LSU, and one of the other young people come to LSU that same year was from a different high school in Lafayette, but I knew him, and it was a guy named Mike Fontham. And so we get to our junior years, and I run for student body president. He ran for student body president, along with 16 of my other best friends. But Mike was probably the smartest of all of us, and I was telling Lizzie at lunch that